Story 1. All she wanted was a blissful wedding day with the love of her life. Was that too much to ask for? Sadly, the best day of her life became the day she would never see tomorrow. In a room filled with music, laughter, and promises, one glass changed everything. A single sip, and everything she built came crashing down. She didn't see the betrayal coming. She never imagined the faces she loved most would be the ones smiling as her world ended. What happened that night would leave a city heartbroken and a nation asking one question. How could this happen? This is a story everyone must hear. A story that reminds us sometimes love isn't what it seems. Born and raised on the south side of Atlanta, Ayanna was a 28-year-old standing at the peak of everything she had fought for. She was a self-made nurse, a first-generation homeowner, a woman who carried her family's hopes on her back without ever complaining. They called her the one who broke the cycle, the one who proved struggle didn't have to be a life sentence. Her victories weren't loud, but they were steady, paying off her student loans early, setting up a savings plan for her nephew's future, showing up at every family gathering with a smile and an open hand. To those around her, Ayanna was more than successful. She was the proof that dreams could live even in the hardest places. And now in the spring of 2023, she was preparing for the moment many said would complete her story. Her wedding day was just hours away. There was excitement in every conversation, in every text. All her friends told her she deserved her fairy tale ending. She laughed easily those last few days, speaking of honeymoon plans and new beginnings, believing that love would crown everything she had worked for. But not every smile around her was genuine, nor was every hand reaching to celebrate her free of envy. Some who cheered for her happiness carried a weight in their eyes. Some loved her light, but hated that it didn't belong to them. April 14th, 2023 was Ayanna's long-awaited day. The ballroom where Ayanna stood shimmered with music, with laughter, with the easy promises of forever. She stood there, beautiful, glowing, her white dress catching the last golden traces of evening light. Someone placed a glass in her hand. She lifted it in gratitude, offering a smile that could have melted any doubt. And in that one moment, as she raised the glass to her lips, Ayanna Brooks unknowingly drank from a cup she should never have drank from. But long before her wedding invitations were printed, before the first glass of champagne was poured, a different plan had already been set in motion. Devin Hart, 32 years old, was the man who stood at the altar with Ayanna, the man who smiled for the photos, the man who promised forever. To the world, he was charming, well-spoken, thoughtful. But behind the tailored suits and easy laughter was a man barely staying afloat. Devin had dreams, big ones, but dreams don't pay bills. His finances were crumbling. He carried debts no one knew about, loans taken out in desperation, credit cards he hadn't made payments on in months. On the outside, he wore confidence like a well-fitted jacket. Inside, he was drowning. Chanel Rivers was 29, Ayanna's best friend since grade school. They had shared lockers, secrets, heartbreaks, and promises that nothing and no one would ever come between them. To everyone who saw them together, Chanel was the sister Ayanna never had. But jealousy is a quiet thing. It smiles. It claps when you win. It hugs you when you announce your engagement. And sometimes it whispers in the dark when no one is looking. Chanel smiled through Ayanna's victories. She smiled through the bridal showers, the dress fittings, the congratulations. But inside, every step Ayanna took forward felt like a reminder of what Chanel believed she deserved too. It was in that space between envy and opportunity that something unthinkable took root. Nearly a year before the wedding, Devin and Chanel crossed a line they knew they could never uncross. A private affair began in stolen moments and hidden messages. It was a betrayal so layered, so tangled, that neither of them could fully explain how it started or why they didn't stop. They justified it to themselves. They told each other it wasn't real. It was just stress, just loneliness, just confusion. But with every secret meeting, every lie told to Ayanna's trusting face, they edged closer toward a decision that would leave blood on their hands. To Ayanna, they were her two biggest supporters. Her soon-to-be husband, her childhood best friend. She would have bet her life on them. And tragically she did. Because while she planned her future with love in her heart, Devin and Chanel rehearsed a different ending altogether. Smiling, celebrating, waiting. They played their parts to perfection, because sometimes the people we trust the most are the ones already writing our final scene. The Grand Marlowe Ballroom pulsed with life on April 13th, 2023. It was just after 2 p.m., and inside those tall gilded doors, everything Ayanna Brooks had ever dreamed of seemed to come alive. The music floated across the chandeliers. Laughter rose above the clink of silverware and glasses. And for a few fleeting hours, it looked like nothing could ever touch the happiness in that room. Guests moved through the space, pausing to admire the ice sculptures, to snap photos in front of the floral walls that Ayanna had handpicked herself. Her smile never faltered. Every time she turned her head, someone else was hugging her, congratulating her, telling her she had found her forever. Devin Hart stood tall at her side, dashing in a black tuxedo, his arms slipping easily around her waist as the cameras flashed. Chanel Rivers floated nearby, always a step away, beaming like the proud best friend she had always pretended to be. No one watching from the outside would have guessed that two of the people standing closest to Ayanna were waiting for the right moment to end her story. The night moved in a blur of toasts and dances. Ayanna twirled across the floor, her laughter lifting into the high ceilings, her dress gliding like a soft cloud behind her. For everyone there, it felt like a celebration of a love story that had conquered everything. But somewhere in the noise, a simple moment was unfolding that would change everything. As the final round of toasts approached, champagne glasses were being prepared behind the scenes. Somewhere amid the laughter, amid the clinking of glasses, Chanel moved. She looked calm and focused. She reached for the two flutes meant for Ayanna and Devin, switching them with practiced ease. One glass untouched, one glass tainted. The guests cheered as the MC announced the last toast of the night. Devin took his glass, his hand steady. Chanel handed Ayanna hers, her fingers brushing the delicate stem, her face betraying nothing. Ayanna turned to Devin, her eyes bright with the kind of love that believes it is invincible. Devin smiled back, raising his glass. He watched her lift hers. He watched the bubbles dance to the surface. He watched her sip. And in that moment, everything they had planned, every lie they had told, every betrayal they had buried came to life inside that single devastating swallow. The room erupted in cheers. Glasses clinked, music swelled. But for Ayanna Brooks, the countdown had already begun. In the time it took to blink, Ayanna Brooks' future was stolen. She drank and never opened her eyes. What started like a love celebration turned to a day of death for Ayanna. 2 days after Ayanna Brooks' death, before her family could even finish making funeral arrangements, Devin Hart and Chanel Rivers walked into the Sterling Life Insurance offices in downtown Atlanta. It was April 16, 2023, just after 11 a.m. They arrived dressed in black, carrying Ayanna's paperwork, speaking softly to the front desk staff about the tragic loss of their beloved wife and best friend. They were ushered into a small office where an agent pulled up the details of Ayanna's newly signed life insurance policy. Devin leaned forward, his voice low, explaining that they were there to collect the $1.7 million Ayanna had signed just weeks before her death. Chanel sat stiffly beside him, nodding along. They believed it would be simple. After all, it was theirs to them. But as the agent scrolled through the file, her expression changed. When she looked up, her voice was steady but cold. She informed them that neither of them was listed as the beneficiary. Devin froze, his mouth half open. Chanel stiffened beside him. The agent repeated it again, slower this time. You are not the beneficiaries. $1.7 million was assigned to Kendall Brooks, Ayanna's estranged sister, the one she had quietly made peace with just 3 weeks before the wedding. Devin's disbelief turned to rage within seconds. He slammed his hands on the desk, shouting that it was impossible. He accused the company of stealing what was rightfully his. He demanded that someone fix the mistake immediately. Chanel tried to pull him back, whispering frantically. But Devin was too far gone. He knocked over a chair, kicked at the doorframe, screaming about betrayal and injustice as security rushed to the room. Guests in the waiting area watched in horror as he was dragged outside, still yelling Ayanna's name. Inside the insurance office, after the door slammed shut and silence returned, the agent quietly flagged the file. She made a call to the Atlanta Police Department. Because two people demanding $1.7 million, 2 days after a bride collapsed on her wedding night, was not something that could be ignored. And with that call, the walls around Devin Hart and Chanel Rivers began to close in. The Atlanta Police Department didn't waste time. After the tip from the insurance office, investigators opened a full case file on the sudden death of Ayanna Brooks. By April 18, 2023, they were already pulling security footage from the Grand Marlowe Ballroom. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. Grainy but clear, the video showed Chanel Rivers standing behind the champagne tower during the final round of toasts. At first glance, it looked harmless. It was just a best friend fussing over wedding details. But when slowed down, The footage captured her switching two glasses. One placed carefully in front of Ayanna. The other slid toward Devin Hart. Less than 20 minutes later, Ayanna collapsed. The next piece of the puzzle came from Ayanna's cell phone records. Forensic analysis uncovered deleted text messages between Devin and Chanel on a burner phone traced back to a prepaid number. One message from Devin read, "We're set after this." Another from Chanel simply said, "Finally." It was enough to shift the investigation from suspicious to criminal. Detectives dug deeper, pulling GPS data from the burner phones. What they found painted an even clearer picture. 2 weeks before the wedding, Devin and Chanel made multiple trips to an industrial chemical supply warehouse on the outskirts of Atlanta, a facility that catered mostly to commercial contractors and agricultural businesses. Neither of them had any legitimate reason to be there. Surveillance cameras from the warehouse confirmed it was them. Chanel in a baseball cap, Devin glancing nervously over his shoulder. They purchased an untraceable, highly toxic chemical compound commonly used in industrial pest control, a substance lethal in even small doses, one that would leave almost no trace once metabolized. As the evidence stacked up, detectives also interviewed Ayanna's inner circle, her co-workers, her friends, her family. Every story painted the same picture. Ayanna had been pure-hearted, selfless. She had spent her last weeks alive planning a future she believed would be shared with people who loved her. One friend broke down in tears, remembering how Ayanna had once paid an overdue electricity bill without being asked. Another remembered Ayanna volunteering to work overnight shifts so a nurse could go home to her kids. The kindness Ayanna showed freely made the betrayal by Devin and Chanel cut even deeper. They hadn't just stolen her life, they had stolen it from someone who would have given them everything if they had just asked. But as detectives pieced together the story, a chilling realization emerged. Ayanna was never their final move. Because inside Devin's apartment, buried under piles of discarded paperwork, police found another set of plans, a second phase, another target. And this time, it wasn't about hiding guilt. It was about finishing what they had started. Death wasn't enough for them. They had one more life they intended to take. By April 20th, 2023, the investigation into the death of Ayanna Brooks was no longer a quiet inquiry. It was a full-blown homicide case, and the two people at the center of it were nowhere to be found. When detectives arrived at Devin Hart's apartment early that morning with a warrant in hand, they found an empty shell. The bed stripped bare, closets ransacked, personal items gone. Only a broken lamp and an unpaid water bill remained. Chanel Rivers' apartment told the same story. Furniture abandoned, drawers emptied, phones disconnected, cars missing. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. The burner phones they once used to plot their betrayal had been smashed and tossed into dumpsters behind gas stations across different counties. Credit cards frozen, bank accounts drained of whatever little was left. It was clear they had planned their disappearance with the same cold calculation they used to plan Ayanna's death. By April 22nd, their faces flooded news stations, plastered across Facebook pages, printed on worn-out posters taped to storefront windows, wanted for questioning in connection to the suspicious death of Atlanta nurse Ayanna Brooks. Anonymous tips flooded in from all corners of the country. Some said they had seen Devin and Chanel driving through Mississippi. Others swore they spotted them at a rest stop in Alabama. But none of the leads held. They were ghosts moving through a country that now knew their names and hated their faces. True crime forums erupted into chaos. TikTok users posted timelines and theories by the hour. Some claimed Devin and Chanel were innocent, saying they were grieving lovers caught in a media frenzy, too scared to face a system that had already judged them guilty. Others, louder, sharper, pointed to the evidence, the insurance debacle, the surveillance footage, the toxicology reports, and saw exactly what was standing in front of them. Murderers hiding behind a mask of sorrow. A line had been drawn in the sand. And while America argued about who Devin Hart and Chanel Rivers really were, the truth remained cold and unchanged. Somewhere out there, two people responsible for the death of a woman who trusted them with her life were still breathing free air. But freedom was running out. Every hour that passed brought them closer to a reckoning they could not escape. As the country searched for Devin Hart and Chanel Rivers, another name quietly moved to the center of it all. Kendall Brooks. The once distant sister Ayanna had forgiven in private weeks before her wedding now found herself living a nightmare she never asked for. On April 23, 2023, detectives from Atlanta Police Department showed up at Kendall's door with a warning. She was no longer just Ayanna's grieving sister. She was now a potential target. The investigation had uncovered evidence that made it impossible to ignore. Handwritten notes recovered from Devon's abandoned apartment listed Kendall's full name, her new address, her workplace, even the routes she usually drove home. The plan wasn't just to silence Ayanna. It was to erase anyone who stood between them and the money they thought was theirs. Police placed Kendall under 24-hour protection. Unmarked vehicles followed her every move. Officers rotated shifts outside her apartment building. Every trip to the grocery store, every walk to her car, every knock at her door carried a fresh wave of fear. Kendall kept her lights off at night. She slept with a suitcase packed by the door. She stayed alive because she had no choice. Meanwhile, across state lines, Devon and Chanel kept moving. They paid cash for motels that didn't ask questions. They changed cars at shady rental lots. They covered their faces whenever they stopped for gas. But no amount of running could erase the trail they left behind. On April 28, 2023, in a small rundown motel off a rural highway in Lafayette, Louisiana, the hunt came to an end. Acting on a tip from a motel clerk who recognized their faces from the news, U.S. Marshals and local police moved in. Devon tried to run. Chanel locked herself in the bathroom. It didn't matter. Within minutes it was over. Inside the motel room, police found a duffel bag filled with cash, prepaid cell phones, a handgun, a hunting knife, a GPS device loaded with Kendall's address, and printed maps showing routes to Atlanta. Kendall wasn't a coincidence. She was a target. They were still coming for her. They were willing to kill again. Their greed didn't end at Ayanna's grave. It demanded more blood. By the summer of 2024, the case against Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers was ready for trial. The courtroom buzzed with reporters, grieving family members, and curious strangers who had followed every twist of the case from their living rooms. On June 10th, opening arguments began inside the Fulton County Courthouse in Atlanta, Georgia. The faces once seen smiling at Ayanna Brooks' wedding now sat stone-faced at the defense table. When the trial opened, Chanel tried to save herself first. She broke down on the stand, sobbing into tissues, painting herself as a victim trapped under Devon's control. She claimed she never wanted to hurt Ayanna, that she was manipulated, threatened, used. Her voice cracked, her hands trembled, and for a moment some in the courtroom shook uncomfortably in their seats. But that moment did not last. The prosecution pulled out the messages, the receipts, the maps, the burner phone records. They showed Chanel sending laughing emojis and texts just days after Ayanna's death. They showed her scouting Kendall's neighborhood. They showed a woman who was not broken. They showed a woman making plans. When Devon took the stand, he showed no tears, no remorse. He blamed everyone but himself. He accused Ayanna of lying about her love for him. He said she manipulated him, used him, humiliated him. He looked directly at the jury and said he was the real victim. Every lie, every word, every excuse fell flat in the heavy silence of the courtroom. Witness after witness testified to Ayanna's kindness, her loyalty, her blind trust in the two people who orchestrated her death. Forensic experts walked the jury through the poison found in her system. Investigators detailed the cold steps Devon and Chanel took to cover their tracks. Friends recounted how Ayanna celebrated Chanel's birthday, just weeks before the wedding, never knowing her best friend was plotting against her. In front of the world, they showed what they truly were. Not victims, predators. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. When they returned, the room held its breath. Devon Hart and Chanel Rivers were both found guilty on all counts. First-degree murder. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, fraud. On July 2nd, 2024, the judge sentenced them each to 50 years in state prison without the possibility of parole. Neither of them flinched when the sentences were read. Neither of them said a word. But for Ayanna's family, for her friends, for a city that still remembered the girl who believed in happy endings, it was the first real step toward justice. The guilty verdict was only the beginning. As news cameras rolled outside the Fulton County Courthouse on July 2nd, 2024, the country watched in real time. Some wept at the sentence. Some shook their heads in disbelief. And many, sitting miles away behind screens, asked the same questions over and over again. Was Chanel Rivers a puppet caught in a web spun by Devon Hart? Or was she the true mastermind hiding behind crocodile tears? Could Ayanna Brooks, with all her heart and kindness, have ever seen this betrayal coming? Or was she doomed the moment she opened her arms to people who never deserved her trust? Is it even possible to live in a world like this and survive trusting no one? Social media erupted into a storm of outrage. TikTok threads dissected every frame of courtroom footage. Podcasts analyzed the timeline hour by hour. Comment sections became battlegrounds. The hashtag #JusticeForAyanna trended across every major platform, shared by celebrities, activists, nurses, mothers, daughters. Strangers who had never heard her name before, but now felt connected to her story. Candlelight vigils were organized from Atlanta to Los Angeles. Donations poured into scholarship funds set up in Ayanna's memory. Murals were painted across city walls. Her smile, once reserved for private moments among family and friends, became a symbol of something bigger. A reminder of how easily love can be weaponized. How quickly trust can be turned into a target. And yet, through all the noise, all the anger, all the mourning, one truth stood clear. Ayanna Brooks deserved more. She deserved better. And even though the verdict had been delivered, her story would continue to echo in the hearts of millions who would never forget what was taken from her. Even after the trial ended and the headlines faded, Ayanna Brooks' name continued to live on. In October 2024, Kendall Brooks announced the creation of the Ayanna Brooks Foundation, a scholarship fund dedicated to supporting minority nursing students across Georgia. She said it was the only way she knew how to honor a sister who had given so much without ever asking for anything in return. Applications poured in from young men and women who carried the same dreams Ayanna once held close. Students who wanted to heal, to serve, to lift others the way Ayanna had lifted so many. Every year since, on the anniversary of Ayanna's wedding day, an annual gala is held in downtown Atlanta. Families, survivors, and supporters gather under twinkling lights, not to mourn her, but to celebrate her legacy. They raise their glasses not to what was lost, but to what she still inspires. At every event, a single candle is placed at the center of the room. It burns from the first guest's arrival until the last light goes out. It burns for the love Ayanna gave so freely. It burns for the trust she placed in people she believed in. It burns for the lives she continues to change even in her absence. That flame has never been allowed to die. Ayanna Brooks believed in love. She lived with hope. In the end, she left the world a little brighter than she found it. And even in her silence, she still speaks. Ayanna Brooks gave everything she had to the people she loved. She trusted when she had every reason to be cautious. She believed when she could have doubted. And in the end, it cost her everything. But her voice is not lost. Her story is not over. It lives in every lesson she left behind. If you have ever been in a relationship and sensed something was wrong, if you have ever laid awake at night with a feeling you could not explain, if you have ever looked into the eyes of someone you love and felt a chill you tried to ignore, trust yourself. Speak up. Protect those you love. Share Ayanna's story because silence kills more dreams than bullets ever could. Story 2. Tonight, a shattering secret unfolds. A truth hidden behind the golden veneer of respect and admiration that has long defined a community. Here begins the story of a man admired by all, whose double life concealed betrayal and unleashed a tide of consequences. His hidden passions, the vulnerable hearts caught in his web, and the relentless pursuit of justice combine to form a tale that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and trust. Today's story is not only a journey through passion and deceit, but also a stark reminder that even our highest heroes are not immune to error, and the cost of those errors can be catastrophic. In the sunbathed hallways and roaring stadiums of Miami Norland Senior High School, Coach Derek Summers shone as a beacon of achievement and discipline. Each game, each practice session, and every well-timed pep talk painted him as the quintessential mentor, a man who inspired not only athletic prowess, but also values of hard work and resilience. To the community, Derek was a role model. He participated in local charity events and was a familiar presence in every school function. His achievements on the field were celebrated with trophies, banners, and a sea of proud faces, all affirming a legacy built on success. But while the public celebrated his victories and his calm authority, a parallel existence was quietly taking root behind closed doors. When the stadium lights dimmed and the cheers faded into distant echoes, Derek stepped away from his well-rehearsed public image. In the privacy of empty corridors and dark parking lots, he indulged in choices that whispered of secret longings, a life carefully divided into two contrasting halves. While his disciplined exterior won the admiration of many, his unsanctioned activities hinted at an internal conflict that would soon send shockwaves through the lives of others. Before he became the celebrated coach, Derek was raised in a modest household in the heart of Miami. Born to parents who struggled but never lost sight of dignity, he found solace in sports, a refuge where hard work often translated into tangible success. As a young man, Derek played local football, his raw talent catching the eye of mentors who saw in him a potential far greater than his humble beginnings. Determined to rise above his circumstances, he embraced every opportunity, forging a path that seemed destined for greatness. His relentless work ethic and his genuine desire to help others achieve their own dreams eventually led him to the position he now held at Miami Norland Senior High School. Yet as he ascended to celebrity status within the community, the weight of expectations began to clash with personal desires that remained hidden. Despite his polished public demeanor, there were chapters of loneliness and forbidden longing penned during his silent hours, a secret life that would later unravel the tapestry of his achievements. Derek's story is one of contrasts, a man who built an impeccable public image while quietly wrestling with impulses that defied the moral framework he preached. His duality was not known to those who cheered for him on humid Friday nights, and it is this very hidden life that forms the seed of the tragedy to come. Within the vibrant, high-spirited world of Miami Norland stood Jessica Rivera, a youthful star in her own right. As a seasoned cheerleader fresh-faced with ambition and a yearning to make her mark, Jessica captivated audiences with her grace and natural charm. Yet behind her effervescent smile lay layers of vulnerability. Raised in a close-knit family that prized talent and determination, Jessica's early years were a delicate balance of rigorous practice and heartfelt dreams. Her parents, having overcome personal hardships, imbued her with the belief that beauty and talent could surmount any challenge. However, the pressures of perfection soon left Jessica craving for genuine connection, for someone who would look past the exuberance of high school life into the depths of her unspoken fears. It was during one of the countless after-school sessions that fate began to weave its delicate, dangerous web. In the soft hum of a nearly empty gym, Jessica's eyes met those of Coach Derek Summers. At first the exchange was fleeting, a polite nod, a shared smile in passing. But over time what started as casual interactions evolved into private conversations that bridged the gap between authority and aspiration. They exchanged brief texts after practice, setting aside the formalities of their roles to reveal quiet confidences. In these hushed moments Jessica found in Derek an unexpected source of attention that validated her insecurities. For Derek, the opportunity to be seen as more than just a mentor offered a brief escape from the isolating pressures of his divided life. Their connection, seated in the mundane cadence of school routines, gradually grew into something that whispered promises of intimacy while remaining locked in secrecy. Derek, whose life had always been defined by rigorous public standards, experienced a respite in Jessica's earnest eyes, a momentary reprieve from the expectations that had so long weighed him down. For Jessica, whose family life had been tempered by cautious optimism and guarded hope, every whispered conversation with her coach filled an emotional void that no ordinary interaction could mend. Beneath every gentle exchange the sense of inevitable consequence hovered, a quiet reminder that the connections formed in secrecy often carry a heavier burden than the light they appear to emit. The affection shared between them was both dangerous and compelling, drawing each into a world where rules melted away beneath the intensity of private confessions. As their bond deepened, the lovers moved further into a realm where every stolen moment, every covert text, was an act of rebellion against the limitations of their respective worlds. This forbidden union, carefully nurtured away from the public eye, promised an escape from loneliness while silently preparing to exact its steepest toll. In life, every choice casts a long shadow, and for Jessica Rivera, that looming darkness came crashing in the form of a single heart-wrenching diagnosis. What was meant to be a routine doctor's visit became a turning point that upended her world. The sterile corridors of a local clinic bore witness to the moment when Jessica learned that the intimate moments she had shared with Coach Summers had left an indelible mark on her body. She had contracted HIV. The news reverberated through her like a shock wave, shattering her dreams of an unburdened future and replacing them with a cloud of foreboding uncertainty. That devastating revelation was paired with another life-altering discovery, a positive pregnancy test that confirmed she was expecting a child conceived in the depths of their forbidden liaison. Within the confines of that cold examination room, hope and fear collided fiercely. Jessica's vivid aspirations for a promising future were darkened by the stark reality of a condition that not only threatened her own life, but also placed the life growing inside her at risk. The burden was immense, a double-edged nightmare that forced her to confront the consequences of a single choice made in moments cloaked in secrecy. Born into a family that had always prized determination and resilience, Jessica had been taught to overcome adversity, yet neither her nurturing background nor the comforting words of parents could completely prepare her for the life that now lay before her, a life painted in shades of struggle and the daunting challenge of societal stigma. In the weeks that followed, every heartbeat reminded her of the irreversible cost of those hidden moments. The clinic's harsh lights, the sterile smell of antiseptic, and the trembling voice of the doctor all combined to engrave a memory that would haunt her for years to come. The weight of the diagnosis settled heavily upon her, transforming each day into a battle between despair and the desperate spark of hope that remained within. Far from being an isolated tragedy, Jessica's personal turmoil signaled the beginning of a cascade of repercussions that would soon rock the foundation of the community around her. It was not merely her future at stake. Every life intertwined in this clandestine affair was beginning to feel the pull of consequence. The facade that had once cloaked the intimacy between her and Derek was now cracking, threatening to expose the chain of events that would lead invariably to a bitter reckoning. While the corridors of Miami Norland continued to echo with cheers and applause, the haunting aftermath of that single visit to the doctor would soon demand its due. In another corner of this intricate story, Maya Arnett, the devoted wife of Coach Derek Summers, began to notice the fragile seams in the tapestry of her once perfect marriage. Born into a family that valued honesty and tenacity, Maya had always believed in the sanctity of her union with Derek. Together, they once painted a picture of domestic bliss, shared smiles over family dinners, dreams exchanged in quiet moments, and the steady support that formed the backbone of their married life. With the arrival of their two children, Ethan and Sophia Summers, the warmth of her family home seemed inviolable, a sanctuary from the harsher realities of life. However, as subtle discrepancies began to emerge, a text received late at night, an unexplained absence, a glance that lingered too long, Maya's certainties were slowly disrupted. The peace she had so carefully cultivated was undercut by an undercurrent of deceit that no amount of hopeful denial could silence. With the steady determination that had long defined her character, Maya started to piece together a mosaic of hints and half-truths. Every misplaced word, every hushed phone conversation, revealed fissures in her world that mounted until they could no longer be ignored. Maya's own childhood had been marked by the lessons of resilience in the face of hardship. Raised by a single parent who taught her that truth, however painful, was essential to survival, she resolved that no betrayal would ever define her future. With an unyielding determination, she began to discreetly archive evidence. The receipts for mysterious expenses, the fragments of overheard conversations, and the carefully hidden documents that finally painted a damning picture of Derek's double life. What emerged was an inexorable narrative of duplicity and concealed affairs that threatened not only her marriage, but the sense of stability her children so dearly depended upon. Maya's journey was as much about protecting her family as it was about reclaiming her own dignity. Every revelation forced her to confront the painful duality of a man who had once been a rock. Yet each step in uncovering the truth strengthened her resolve to rebuild a future that was free from the intrusion of betrayal. Rather than allowing bitter anger to overwhelm her, Maya channeled her grief into an unwavering commitment to ensure that the institution of trust, within her family and beyond, would never again be so easily subverted. Her determination to gather undisputable evidence not only set the stage for the broader investigation, but also laid the groundwork for the transformation that would soon emanate from the heart of her personal tragedy. On a storm-darkened night, when the heavens released torrents and fate converged with calculated intent, a pivotal moment arrived that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. In a cruel twist of fate, Coach Derek Summers was lured to a high-rise apartment under an elaborate pretext, a meeting that was meant to rejoin him with his secret lover Jessica Rivera. Yet on that fateful evening, the course of the future was dramatically rewritten. Tormented by her devastating diagnosis and terrified by the immense responsibility of impending motherhood, Jessica made a split-second decision to cancel the rendezvous. She raced instead to a nearby crisis center, seeking both refuge and the immediate care necessary to shelter her fragile state. Unaware of the sudden change, Derek arrived at the designated site alone, his hope and longing mingled with a quiet confidence born of routine clandestine meetings. It was in that lonely moment, as rain hammered relentlessly and thunder shook the night, that his fate was sealed. A meticulously orchestrated ambush unfolded under the cover of the storm, designed by the calculating hand of Victor Delgado. Once a close business associate of Derek's turned bitter adversary, Delgado's life had been marred by feelings of betrayal and humiliation after a lucrative partnership crumbled. Determined to exact vengeance, Delgado assembled a team of professionals to ensure that his plan would not go awry. Among them was Rafael Cortez, an ex-military enforcer renowned for his clinical precision, Marlon Diaz, whose expertise in covert operations was unwavering, and Luis Gutierrez, a master of technical manipulation and evidence obliteration. As Derek waited in the deserted hallway of the apartment building, the relentless rain and howling wind set a grim cadence, in a heartbeat that would become etched in the annals of Miami's dark history. The silence was shattered by a single decisive gunshot. The bullet fired by Rafael tore through the gloom and struck Derek with ruthless efficiency, ending a life that had balanced on the edge of public adoration and private error. In the ensuing chaos, Marlon and Luis moved systematically, erasing any trace that might later lead back to the conspirators. Within minutes, the space that had once echoed with life was filled only with the sound of falling rain and the quiet finality of a life extinguished. In a twist that would forever link her fate to this tragic night, Jessica, drawn from the safety of the crisis center by a surge of anxious instinct, ventured briefly near a perimeter window of the apartment building. From that vantage, her wide eyes bore witness to the devastating outcome, a lone figure crumpling to the ground beneath a solitary gunshot. Overwhelmed by horror and sorrow, she immediately retreated back to the safety of her refuge, preserving her anonymity. Days later, a combination of surveillance footage and painstaking forensic evidence would confirm her non-involvement and protect her from wrongful accusations that threatened to taint her already fragile life. In the aftermath of that dismal rain-drenched night, Miami's sense of security was overturned by questions and demands for justice. The celebrated halls of Miami Norland Senior High School were soon filled not with the echo of cheers, but with murmurs of shock and sorrow as the truth of Coach Summers' hidden duplicity began to surface. Amid this storm of public disbelief, Detective Marco Alvarez was summoned, a man whose reputation for meticulous and steadfast investigation had long been his calling card. Joined by the methodical officer Linda Ray and the astute forensic specialist Dr. Helen Kwan, Alvarez embarked on an exhaustive pursuit that would leave no secret buried. Detective Alvarez was no stranger to the complexities of cases that cut deep into the fabric of community life. A native of Miami, Alvarez's early experiences in a rough neighborhood instilled in him a fervent belief in justice and the absolute necessity of uncovering every truth. Over the years, his work in the police department honed his inability to spot inconsistencies and to trace even the faintest digital footprint back to its source. With a calm and measured demeanor, he initiated an investigation that began with the seemingly isolated facts of one fateful ambush and soon revealed an extensive network of betrayal. Every shred of evidence, no matter how minute, a cryptic text message, a financial transaction that defied explanation, the precise angle of a bullet's trajectory, was carefully catalogued. Alvarez's team, screening hours of surveillance footage from the night in question, identified the unmistakable presence of Rafael Cortez as he moved through the building. Coupled with the digital trail that linked Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez to the systematic eradication of evidence, a damning picture emerged. It became indisputable that the mastermind behind the calculated vendetta was Victor Delgado, a man whose life had been irreversibly marred by the collapse of a once valued partnership with Derek Summers. Victor Delgado's background was a tale of ambition turned bitter. Raised in an environment where success was the only measure of worth, Delgado had once risen to prominence alongside Derek. However, as business fortunes shifted and Derek made decisions that left Delgado sidelined and humiliated, the embers of resentment began to glow. Over time, that quiet anger coalesced into a vengeful plan, one that would force Derek's downfall by any means necessary. Delgado's orchestration of this elaborate plot, documented through encrypted emails and clandestine phone calls, confirmed his intent to exact retribution for a personal wound that had festered over years. With the mounting evidence, Alvarez and his team brought the case before a court of law. In a trial that drew a record crowd and intense media scrutiny, Alvarez presented a steadfast investigation, unwavering evidence, and the unchallenged testimony of key witnesses. The courtroom became a stage where the dark underbelly of loyalty, ambition, and betrayal was laid bare. The verdict was unequivocal. Rafael Cortez, whose single gunshot had sealed Derek's fate, was condemned to death. Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez were sentenced to life without parole. And Victor Delgado, the orchestrator of this tragic series of events, was handed a lengthy prison term designed to permanently banish him from ever-wielding power again. In the months and years that followed the trial, the reverberations of Coach Derek Summers' death rippled across the community and reshaped lives in profound ways. The once revered Miami Norland Senior High School underwent a transformation as school boards and community leaders implemented sweeping reforms. Ethically binding oversight committees were established, and protocols were redefined to forge an environment where honesty and accountability would be the new bedrocks of institutional heritage. For Maya Arnett, the journey toward healing was a slow but determined passage through grief and recovery. After the trial's conclusion, the heartbreak of betrayal was tempered by the resolve to rebuild a future free from deception. Maya, who had been forced to confront the dual realities of her husband's public triumphs and private failings, redirected her energy toward raising her children, Ethan and Sophia Summers, with renewed strength. Drawing on her own childhood lessons of perseverance, Maya embraced therapeutic guidance and community support networks that helped her find meaning in the wreckage of a broken marriage. Though the pain of knowing that the man she loved had a life of duplicity would linger, she soon discovered that forgiveness could serve as a foundation for a transformed household. In a remarkable act of reconciliation, Maya eventually opened her heart to extend empathy toward Jessica Rivera, bridging the gap between two families once divided by tragedy. Jessica's path, too, became a saga of renewal. In the immediate wake of her life-altering diagnosis, she was overwhelmed by sorrow and isolation. However, the compassionate care and advanced treatments provided by a dedicated medical team soon stabilized her condition. With the support of close family members, especially her devoted cousin Carmen Rios, Jessica learned to manage her illness, ensuring that the life growing within her would be given every chance to flourish. 9 months after that fateful ambush, she gave birth to a healthy son, Jose Summers, whose existence became a beacon of hope for all who knew the story. Medical reports confirmed that young Jose was free of HIV, a fact that symbolized a victory of modern medicine and human resilience. Refusing to allow her past to define her destiny, Jessica sought to reclaim her future. Enrolling full-time at a prestigious university, she pursued a degree in social work, a field that resonated deeply with her desire to advocate for others who had suffered silently. Balancing the rigorous demands of academia with the responsibilities of new motherhood, Jessica transformed her hardships into an inspirational force. Throughout these challenging years, her cousin Carmen ensured that baby Jose was lovingly cared for, enabling Jessica to focus on her studies and eventually graduate with top honors. Her academic success shone as proof that even the most painful beginnings could be rewritten into narratives of triumph. As time passed, the evolving bond between Maya's family and Jessica's household grew steadily stronger. What once began as the hurt of betrayal gradually evolved into a shared commitment to healing and community reform. Maya's children, Ethan and Sophia, came to view young Jose as an extension of their own family, a symbol of how, despite all pain, new beginnings could emerge. Through regular family gatherings, joint community events, and public outreach projects, the once fractured families united behind a common goal: to honor the memory of Derek Summers by fostering a legacy of integrity that would safeguard future generations against deception. Across Miami, the remembrance of this turbulent chapter spurred far-reaching changes. Miami Norland Senior High School instituted unprecedented reforms that addressed not only the oversight of its coaches and administrators, but also the mentoring practices that shaped young lives. Driven by the tragic lessons of recent events, teachers, parents, and civic leaders joined forces to ensure that the dark chapters of the past were not repeated. The transformation was felt in every classroom and echoed throughout the corridors of local governance, a commitment to rebuild trust on a foundation of transparency, support, and mutual respect. As we close this harrowing chapter, the legacy of Coach Derek Summers' hidden life and its catastrophic end offers numerous lessons. Each segment of this tale, from a public image marred by private failings to the relentless quest for reparation, serves to remind us that while human frailties are inevitable, so too is the pursuit of truth. The intricate web of betrayal has forever changed lives, yet it has also ignited a collective resolve to ensure that the mistakes of the past steer us toward a better, more compassionate future. Jessica Rivera's transformation is emblematic of that resolve. From the devastating shock of an HIV diagnosis and the overwhelming responsibility of unplanned motherhood, she emerged as an advocate and scholar who used her personal trials as the catalyst for a new beginning. Her choice to study social work, coupled with the unwavering support from her family and the nurturing guidance of cousins like Carmen Rios, transformed her pain into a mission to help others reclaim their lives from the clutches of injustice. Today, Jessica stands not only as a survivor, but also as an inspiring beacon for countless individuals grappling with adversity. Maya Arnett, though scarred by the duplicity of the man she once adored, found that her strength lay in the future she built for her children, Ethan and Sophia Summers. In rising above the darkness of past betrayals, she discovered that healing is a journey best traveled in unity. By forging a new familial bond with Jessica, and by embracing the fragile hope embodied in baby Jose Summers, Maya has redefined the meaning of forgiveness. Her determination to foster an environment where transparency and accountability reign has not only mended the fractures within her household, but has inspired broader reforms within the community. Detective Marco Alvarez's painstaking investigation, supported by the diligent efforts of Officer Linda Ray and Dr. Helen Kwan, exemplified the power of steadfast commitment. Their work illuminated the dark corners where deceit had festered, ultimately leading to a resounding verdict that demonstrated society's unwavering demand for justice. The harsh sentences, capital punishment for Rafael Cortez, life imprisonment for Marlon Diaz and Luis Gutierrez, and a lengthy term for Victor Delgado, stand as a stark reminder that every transgression, no matter how deeply hidden, will one day be brought to light. The communities that once marveled at the triumphs of Miami Norland Senior High School now rally behind new values. Those which prioritize ethical leadership, real accountability, and the protection of the most vulnerable. The tragic demise of Coach Derek Summers, a story etched into Miami's collective memory, has become a catalyst for institutional change and personal redemption. As families come together, bridging the gap between once divided lives, they present a future where the lessons of the past are honored not with bitterness, but with a renewed commitment to justice and unity. In each whispered conversation, each shared tear, and every act of reformation sparked by this turbulent tale, there is an enduring promise that the pursuit of truth, however costly, will ultimately illuminate the darkest corners of our society. The intertwined destinies of Jessica, Maya, their children, and the entire community remind us that even in the wake of devastating loss, hope can flourish once more. Let this story not only serve as a chronicle of betrayal and its consequences, but also as a triumphant testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Story 3. She raised them on her own, gave up sleep, gave up comfort, gave up everything just to make sure they had more than she ever did, worked herself into exhaustion so they'd never have to feel the kind of hunger she grew up with. And when she finally said no, when she decided it was time they learned the value of what they were given, she never expected the silence that followed, never questioned the quiet stares, the locked doors, the late-night whispers, and by the time she started noticing things that didn't make sense. The woman who spent her life giving everything to the people she loved most walked straight into something she never saw coming, something planned, something cruel, something that left police standing over her body in a room, and a question that still haunts every person who knew her. How did it come to this? Serena Antoinette Williams was 42 years old, a woman who lived with intention. Her life didn't bend toward chance, it followed a plan. She was born in Baton Rouge, raised by a mother who worked in a hospital kitchen, and a father who disappeared before she turned 7. By the time she was 16, Serena had already made up her mind that survival wouldn't be enough. She wanted more. She left Louisiana at 26 with a borrowed suitcase and a tax refund check, and by 30, she was settled in Los Angeles with a master's degree in finance, a small apartment in Leimert Park, and a new marriage she believed would finally bring her peace. But peace didn't last. In 2009, she gave birth to twin boys, Javian and Kale. 2 pounds of fragile life in each arm. No instruction manual. No help. Just her, and a silence that started the moment her husband, DeMarco Hughes, left the hospital with a suitcase and never came back. He didn't even send a message. By the time she learned he had moved in with his secretary, a woman 10 years younger and half as committed, Serena had already accepted the reality that she would be doing this alone. There were no child support checks, no weekend visits, no apologies. Just diaper bags, rent notices, and long nights that blurred into one another. She waited tables by night and filed spreadsheets by day. Some weeks, she worked 70 hours just to stay ahead. She missed birthdays, canceled dates, said no to family events. Also, her boys could eat without question and sleep without worry. By 2017, Serena had clawed her way into a full-time role at one of the top financial firms downtown. It didn't come with sympathy. There was no leeway for being late. No understanding when she needed to leave early because one of the twins had a fever. But she stayed. She kept showing up. Every spreadsheet balanced. Every deadline met. Every promise kept. She didn't dress flashy. Didn't chase luxury. But when tax season came around, the boys always had new shoes. Birthdays were never skipped. She taught them how to use debit cards before they hit middle school. Their fridge was always full. Their clothes folded and pressed. Everything Serena did pointed back to them. By 2020, she was finally making 6 figures. The apartment had turned into a 2-story rental in Baldwin Hills, with a backyard big enough to host cookouts. She bought her first car in her own name, without a cosigner. Javian and Kale were now teenagers, taller than her, deep-voiced, and full of attitude. She laughed when they tried to sound grown. She told friends they were good kids, a little spoiled maybe, but respectful. She believed it. She wanted to believe it. But underneath the structure, beneath the daily routines, was something she couldn't see. A feeling she ignored. Like something was shifting, but too slowly to catch. She was exhausted, but she told herself it was worth it. Every sacrifice felt justified. She'd chosen this life. And in her eyes, she was winning. She couldn't see what was happening in the background. She had no reason to check their phones. No reason to question how much cash they had. No reason to wonder why they no longer came to the dinner table when she called, because she believed deeply that love, if poured in hard enough, could not fail. But love alone doesn't tell you when the floor is about to fall out from under you. By the fall of 2023, Javian and Kale turned 15. For Serena, it was a bittersweet shift, the kind of change every parent hopes for and dreads at the same time. They weren't little boys anymore. They had opinions, schedules, moods, secrets. That fall, Serena made a decision she believed would strengthen their bond. She started giving them each $3,000 a week as their allowance. Cash. Every Saturday morning. She called it financial freedom. A mother's way of saying, I trust you. I see you becoming men. Javian used this to build an image. He collected Jordans, wore them once, then stacked the boxes like trophies. He bought designer shirts in colors Serena had never seen before. He spent hours in the mirror, brushing his waves, posing for pictures. Timing went to post, so he'd get the most likes. Kale handled things differently. Quieter. More methodical. He didn't show off. He didn't care about shoes or selfies. He spent his money learning how to trade crypto, watching hours of tutorials on YouTube, studying charts. He talked about NFTs like they were currency and bragged about flipping Ethereum in class. Together, they moved like a unit. One loud, one calculating, always in sync, always in control. Their bedroom became a showroom. Rows of high-top sneakers, LED lights outlining the ceiling. A gaming setup with 2 monitors, one for school, one for everything else. The house itself was modest. But that room, it looked like it belonged in a music video. Serena saw the lifestyle growing around them and chalked it up to confidence. Style. Maybe even ambition. She smiled when they showed her the shoes. Laughed when they joked about their classmates still wearing last year's brands. She didn't ask questions about how fast the money disappeared. She didn't tell them to slow down. She just kept handing it over thinking they're good boys. They deserve it. She believed that spoiling them wasn't spoiling them. It was healing something. Making up for what their father never gave. Making up for what she couldn't always be. She wanted them to walk into rooms with pride. She wanted them to never feel small. If $3,000 a week gave them that, then so be it. But while Serena was pouring love in the only way she knew how, something else was taking shape beneath the surface. A shift that didn't feel sharp or sudden. It crept in slowly, through late-night door slams. Vague answers. Phone calls that entered the room. The house still looked the same. Dinner was still on the stove. The walls were still clean. But her boys, something about them had changed. She just hadn't been told yet. Not by them. Not by anyone in the house. It would take a call from someone outside. Someone who'd been watching from a distance to finally make Serena look closer. It was on a Friday, December 1st, 2023, just before 1 in the afternoon, when Serena's personal phone rang in the middle of her workday. A number she didn't recognize flashing across the screen, while she was buried in client files and running on a half-eaten granola bar. And something about the timing, or maybe just the stillness in the air around her, made her pause long enough to swipe and answer. Only to hear the measured voice of Ms. Latrice Bell, the school counselor at Washington Charter High, who didn't waste time on small talk or pleasantries but got right to the point, calmly yet firmly explaining that there had been concerns about her sons, Javion and Kyle. Specifically that they had been handing out $100 bills at school, flaunting luxury items during class hours, throwing unsanctioned off-campus parties with strip club themes, and recently caught with vape pens and more money than any 15-year-old should ever be carrying in a backpack. Serena's grip tightened around her pen as she listened, her brain struggling to make the words match the boys she kissed goodbye every morning. The ones who had grown up sleeping 3 feet from her bed when rent was late and space was tight. And while Belle kept speaking, her tone careful but direct, Serena heard only fragments now. Social media, dangerous influence, administration becoming concerned. Other parents starting to call, all swirling together into a pressure behind her eyes that made it hard to blink, let alone breathe. And by the time she ended the call and placed the phone back on her desk, her world hadn't exploded. Not yet, but a quiet kind of storm had started to press against her chest. And the only thing louder than the silence in her office was the pounding of her heart asking the same question over and over. What have they been doing behind my back? She made it through the rest of the workday without letting anyone see that something was wrong. Nodded in meetings, typed reports, smiled at her team on the way out of the building like her world wasn't tilting. But the moment she got home, after dinner had been cooked, the dishes rinsed, and both boys had retreated behind their locked doors with their usual, "I'm good, Ma," she sat on the edge of her bed, opened her laptop, and typed in the username she hadn't seen before, but had been quietly passed along by Ms. Bell during the call. J Money for Real, and Kale the Dawn, 2 names that didn't sound like her sons, but belonged to them nonetheless. She looked at their Instagram profiles, the ones she never knew about, and what loaded on the screen didn't just take her by surprise. It took the air out of her lungs. Post after post, showing her sons throwing money like it had no value, making slow-motion videos in hotel rooms under red lighting, flashing expensive watches, and pouring out liquor she had never once seen in their home. All while surrounded by teenage girls, dressed for something no high school should ever have allowed. Their captions smug and loud, filled with hashtags like "money ain't a thing," "mom don't know," "3 con repeat," and "too rich for rules." And in one post that froze her hand over the trackpad, Javion stood in the middle of the school parking lot, throwing bills in the air while Kale counted stacks behind him, laughing like he'd just won a game Serena didn't even know they were playing. She kept scrolling, each swipe heavier than the last, watching her sons live a version of themselves she had never seen before, one full of pride, of ego, of something almost cruel, and how carefree they looked while she worked 60-hour a week, just to make sure they had clean sheets and meals that never ran out. And the deeper she went into the images, the more the house she thought she'd built seemed like it had been made of glass, because these weren't just boys having fun. These were boys who had learned to lie with their smiles, to live double lives in the same home, where she once rocked them to sleep and promised them the world. When she finally closed the laptop, her hand stayed still on the keyboard for a long time, her eyes burning not just from the screen, but from the realization that what Ms. Bell had told her wasn't even the story. It was just the surface, and what lay beneath it was a kind of disappointment that didn't come with shouting or slamming doors, but with silence, a kind of hurt that settled low in her stomach and wouldn't move. And as the tears finally came, quiet and bitter, sliding down her face one at a time, she didn't say anything out loud, not because there was nothing to say, but because the kind of pain she felt didn't need words to be understood. It was the kind you feel when everything you've built, everything you've worked for, everything you thought was solid, suddenly shifts beneath you, and for the first time in years, Serena wasn't sure if she still knew who her sons really were. It was early Saturday morning, the sun barely up, the sky still carrying that gray-blue color that sits between night and day, and Serena stood in the kitchen with her arms folded tight against her chest, both boys seated across from her at the table, Javion with his hoodie pulled low over his forehead, Kale scrolling quietly on his phone with one hand in his lap. She didn't raise her voice, didn't throw threats, didn't preach. She just looked at them, calm and firm, and said, "Your allowance is now $200. That's it. You want more? Earn it." And for a moment, there was no response, no reaction, just a long stretch of silence that made the air feel heavy in the room. Jivian blinked slowly, lifted his head, looked her straight in the eye, but didn't say a word, then stood up without pushing in the chair, walked out of the kitchen, and didn't speak again for 2 full days. Not a word, not even a glance in her direction. While Cale sat there a little longer, jaw clenched, eyes darting like he wanted to say something but couldn't decide if it was worth it. And by nightfall, the tension in the house had settled into every wall, every hallway, every quiet moment, like a weight no one knew how to lift. That afternoon, Serena heard a loud crash from upstairs. Cale had thrown his PS5 against the closet door, shattering it into pieces, small parts scattered across the carpet like pieces of a broken promise. And when she opened his door to ask what was going on, he just stared at her and said, "It's nothing," then turned his back and pulled the blanket over his head, leaving her standing there wondering if this was just teenage emotion or something deeper taking shape in a space she could no longer reach. By that night, the house felt colder, not in temperature, but in spirit, like something unspoken had moved in with them. And as Serena sat in her room scrolling through emails she couldn't focus on, she heard muffled voices through the vent. Javian and Cale whispering just low enough that the words didn't carry clearly, just tones, rhythms, fragments of phrases, too soft to understand, but too deliberate to ignore. In the darkness of their room, lit only by the soft glow of a phone screen, Cale leaned in and said under his breath, "She really don't know who she raising." And Javian, quiet but steady, nodded without saying much, the silence between them louder than anything they could have spoken. Both boys locked in thought, their faces calm, their hands still, the tension in their bodies not explosive but focused. And whatever started forming in that moment wasn't loud or dramatic, it was slow, it was quiet, it was rooted in something far more dangerous than anger. Because they weren't just mad about the money, they felt exposed, they felt challenged. And deep down, even if they couldn't say it out loud, they had started to believe that the woman in the room down the hall, the one who worked late and gave early, the one who made sacrifices without asking for recognition, had become an obstacle, not a provider, not a mother in the way they once understood her, but someone who stood in the way of what they thought they deserved. And instead of pushing back, instead of confronting her directly, they started thinking in steps, in strategy, in silence. And the part Serena couldn't see, the part that kept her in the dark, was that while she thought she was setting boundaries, teaching values, showing tough love, her sons weren't just reacting, they were recalculating, reassessing, adjusting their view of her, not as someone to be feared or honored, but as someone to be outplayed, as a problem to solve, as the final barrier between them and a version of life they believed was still theirs for the taking. For the next few days, it looked from the outside like things were getting better, because Javian started coming downstairs again, fixing himself cereal without slamming cabinets, nodding when Serena asked if he needed anything, even chuckling once at a meme she sent him by text when they were sitting in the same house but too far apart to talk, and Cale, who had barely made eye contact with her the entire weekend, started offering quick, one-word answers, keeping his headphones around his neck, instead of blasting music to drown her out. And if you didn't know any better, you might have thought the worst had passed, that the boys had accepted the change, that the anger had cooled, and the house was finding its balance again. Serena, exhausted from the emotional weight of it all, wanted to believe it too, because in between the overtime hours, the grocery runs, and the lonely nights she spent staring at bank statements trying to figure out how they had burned through so much money so fast, it was easier to take the peace they were offering at face value than to question what it really meant. They ate dinner with her, not at the table, but at least in the same room, plates resting on their laps as they scrolled through their phones and laughed at videos. And even though the conversation was thin and the smiles didn't reach their eyes, Serena clung to it, needing it, convincing herself that maybe cutting the allowance had been the shock they needed, that maybe this was just another hard phase they would look back on one day and laugh about, never knowing that underneath the surface, her sons were playing a different game entirely. Javian and Kyle were not healing, they were plotting, learning how to say just enough to lower her guard, smiling just wide enough to stop her from asking too many questions, moving through the house like nothing had changed when in reality everything had, and in their minds, the decision had already been made, the plan already set in motion. It started on December 6, 2023, when Serena checked her Instagram during a late night at home, sitting cross-legged on her bed, the TV buzzing quietly in the background, when a new DM popped up from a man named Mr. Blaze True, whose profile looked polished and professional, showing pictures of business trips, conference rooms, luxury watches, and soft, well-lit selfies of a man who appeared to be every bit the part he claimed, a 47-year-old entrepreneur from Chicago who traveled often. Talked about business, success, soulmates, second chances, and dreams that still had time to come true. He was handsome, but not the kind of handsome that made you suspicious right away. He wore glasses in some photos, casual sweaters in others, and in every conversation, he made Serena feel like she wasn't just another face in a crowd, but a woman being seen for who she was, not as a mother, not as a worker, but as someone worth waiting for, worth talking to, worth building with. And every night, as the boys locked themselves away in their rooms, and the house fell into that kind of thick silence, she would pull out her phone, and there he would be, Blaze, sending good morning messages before sunrise, sending voice notes full of slow, deliberate laughter that made her close her eyes and smile without meaning to, sending poetry she hadn't realized she still wanted to hear, calling her queen in a way that didn't sound rehearsed, but felt like the simplest, purest thing she had been missing all along. At first it was harmless, long talks about what they wanted from life, what they regretted, what they still hoped for, talks about marriage and vacations, and what it would be like to finally love someone without fear, without shame, without having to hold part of yourself back. And for the first time in years, Serena allowed herself to believe in something she hadn't trusted for a long time, not because Blaze was perfect, but because he felt easy, familiar, like a story she already knew the ending to. For weeks in, just after New Year's, the first favor came, slipping into their conversations almost casually when he said he had been traveling back from New York, that TSA had held his bag over some misunderstanding, that his wallet was missing, and he was stranded for the night, that it was embarrassing to ask, but he trusted her, knew she was different, and he just needed $400 to check into a hotel and cover expenses until the airline sorted it out, and without thinking twice, without weighing it like she would have done if it had been anyone else. Serena sent the money over Zelle in under 3 minutes, telling herself that's what trust looked like when it mattered. It didn't stop there, because a few days later came another request, $900 this time, for a short-term investment opportunity he swore would double in a matter of weeks. And though Serena hesitated for a breath, the way he talked about building a future together, about laying foundations, about planting seeds they would both one day harvest, made it feel like not just a transaction, but a step toward the life she deserved. So she sent that too, reassuring herself that real relationships meant risk sometimes. By February, the asks had grown larger, more confident, slipping into their conversations like afterthoughts, sometimes tied to business deals, sometimes to emergencies, once even framed as him wanting to surprise her with a ticket to Miami for a weekend getaway, something special just for them, and each time, Serena dipped deeper into her savings without feeling the loss immediately, telling herself that she could always make it back. That money was replaceable, but moments like this, feeling loved, feeling chosen, those didn't come around twice. By March, Blaze no longer had to explain. A simple, "Can you send it, baby?" was enough, and by the time she finally stopped to check the damage, the emergency fund she had spent almost a decade quietly building for the boys' college tuition, for her first home, for a future she hadn't even allowed herself to picture, clearly was gone. $70,000 gone, not in one big transaction, not in a robbery or a break-in, but piece by piece, story by story, promise by promise, in small, almost invisible withdrawals, that didn't just take her money but chipped away at the belief that she had any control left at all. And yet even as her account balance sank lower, even as her phone lit up with payment confirmations she couldn't bear to look at, Serena still clung to hope, still told herself that Blaze was real, that people didn't just fake. This kind of connection, that after everything she had survived, after every year spent carrying life alone, she couldn't be wrong about this too, because if he wasn't who he said he was, then what did that say about the world she had tried so hard to believe in? She didn't want to be foolish, she didn't want to be desperate, but more than anything she didn't want to be alone again. And that's why when Blaze's messages began to thin out, when his responses grew shorter, when the nightly phone calls stopped altogether, Serena didn't confront him right away. She made excuses for him, blamed the time zones, the stress of business, the weight of real life, anything to avoid facing the small, gnawing truth taking shape in the back of her mind, until the day came when even she couldn't deny it anymore, until the night she sat staring at her empty bank app, heart pounding, hands trembling, and realized she might have been holding on to a ghost. She had waited 4 long months for a chance to put a face to the name, to the voice that had become a part of her daily routine, to the dreams that had carried her through long shifts and empty nights. And when she finally typed out the words, "I think you're lying to me," She stared at the screen for a long time before hitting send, her heart thudding against her ribs in a way that felt too loud for the quiet of her bedroom. And when his reply came back just minutes later, smooth, easy, without a flicker of hesitation, "If you think I'm fake, let's meet Friday, 7 p.m. Inglewood," there was a part of her that exhaled, and another part that braced for something she couldn't name yet, but could feel gathering in the space around her. She agreed, of course she agreed, because deep down, Serena needed answers more than she needed the illusion of peace. And as Friday crept closer, she moved through her days on autopilot, washing dishes, answering emails, folding laundry, pretending she didn't notice how her hands shook when she thought too long about what could happen, pretending she didn't hear the warning voice whispering at the edge of her mind that not all stories get neat endings. And on the night of the meeting, she took extra time getting ready, choosing a soft black dress she hadn't worn in months, spraying her favorite perfume along her wrists and neck, the scent wrapping around her like armor, a reminder that she was still here, still standing, still deserving of love that didn't hurt. Before she left, she tucked a small recording device into the lining of her purse, a gift from a client years ago, something she had forgotten she even owned until that morning when the doubt finally screamed loud enough to be heard. And as she zipped her bag closed, she told herself she wasn't just doing this for certainty. The drive to Inglewood was quiet, headlights stretching across dark streets, the radio low but not off, her heart hammering against the soft hum of the tires on the pavement, and she gripped the steering wheel tighter at every red light, rehearsing in her mind what she would say, how she would keep her voice steady, how she would demand her money back without letting him see how much he had broken something inside her, how she would walk away with her head high no matter what she found waiting for her. The address he sent led to a short-term rental tucked between two aging apartment buildings, a place that looked decent enough on the outside, white paint, a small porch light flickering against the early spring air, and as she pulled into the narrow driveway, cutting the engine and sitting for a moment in the dark, Serena breathed in deep, gathering herself, telling herself it was just a conversation, that she would be careful, that she wouldn't let emotion take over. She reached for her purse, checking the recorder one more time, feeling the small weight of it in her palm like a tether to something real, something solid, and then she stepped out of the car, her heels crunching softly against the gravel, her pulse loud in her ears, the world narrowing to the path between her and the front door, and every step felt heavier than the last. But she kept going, because if she didn't see it through now, if she didn't face whatever was waiting inside, she knew she would carry this unanswered ache with her forever. She knocked once, then twice, her knuckles grazing the painted wood, and for a moment there was nothing, just the low buzz of a television somewhere nearby, and the smell of something faintly sweet drifting from under the door, maybe candles, maybe cologne, and then the door creaked open, slow, deliberate, like whoever was inside had been standing just on the other side waiting. Serena held her breath, waiting for the man she had built in her mind, the businessman, the rescuer, to step forward, but what she saw instead made the blood drain from her face, made the air stick in her lungs, made her knees almost give way beneath her, because standing there, framed in the doorway, were not the broad shoulders and polished smile of a stranger. It was Jvayan, and behind him Kale. Their faces weren't angry, they weren't scared, they were calm, like this had always been the plan. Serena's purse slid from her shoulder, hitting the floor with a dull thud, the recorder inside still running, still capturing every heartbeat, every silent scream trapped in her chest, and she stared at her sons, the boys she had carried, fed, loved, protected, with a horror that no mother is ever prepared to feel, the kind that tears something loose inside you that can never be repaired. She stared at them wide-eyed, heart slamming against her ribs, 1,000 questions flooding her mind but none of them making it to her mouth. And when she finally found her voice, it cracked in a way that didn't sound like her anymore, raw and desperate and hollow. "Tell me this isn't you," she said, almost whispered, almost begged. Jvayan lifted his hood just enough to meet her eyes, his face calm, not angry, not ashamed, just exhausted, like this was something they had already made peace with a long time ago. And he said, "We had to, Mom, we had to keep up the life you made us used to." And behind him Kale nodded, adding, "You taught us to want more, and then you took it away." Serena shook her head, stepping back, chest heaving, trying to find the edges of this nightmare, trying to pull herself out of it, trying to believe there was still a way to fix it. But the way they looked at her, the absence of regret in their eyes, told her there wasn't. She reached for her phone with a speed she didn't know she still had, her fingers brushing the screen just enough to open it, just enough to almost call for help. But Kale moved faster, grabbing her wrist with a force that made her gasp, twisting it just enough to make her drop the phone, sending it skittering across the floor out of reach. And before she could scream, before she could pull free, Javian stepped forward, covering her mouth with one hand, pressing hard, his other hand pinning her. Shoulders back as Kale moved behind her, both of them working in a sick, practiced rhythm that made it clear this moment wasn't a mistake, wasn't an accident, wasn't something they were regretting even as it was happening. Serena fought harder than she ever thought she could, kicked and twisted and tried to bite down, tried to break free, tried to reach the door or the phone or anything that could save her, but their grip tightened. Javian continued strangling her, his palm careful covering her mouth to prevent her from shouting. Kale also brought out a kitchen knife and kept stabbing her in the stomach when he noticed that she was being too hard to take down. The jazz music kept playing, the candles kept flickering, and somewhere outside, just a few feet away, the world kept turning, unaware that inside this little rental house, a mother was losing everything she had ever built, ever loved, ever sacrificed for, one breath at a time. She was strangled to death. At exactly 9:42 p.m., almost 3 hours after Serena had first stepped into the Airbnb, the property host, a man named Calvin Reed, who lived 2 houses down, checked the Ring camera notification on his phone after seeing movement near the front porch, and at first, he didn't think much of it. Maybe another guest. Maybe someone checking in late, but when he zoomed in, when he leaned closer and caught sight of something dark staining the edge of the porch stairs, something that didn't look like wine or rain or anything harmless, he hesitated for just a second before tapping the emergency call button and telling the dispatcher there was something wrong at his rental, something that didn't feel right. When LAPD officers arrived minutes later, lights flashing against the small white rental home, they found the front door pushed open slightly, the smell of candles still lingering in the air, the soft echo of jazz music still playing from somewhere deeper inside, and when they stepped in, weapons drawn, they moved carefully through the small living space until they saw her, Serena Williams, lying motionless on the floor near the hallway, her body twisted, her dress torn at the seam, her face half shadowed by the light coming from a nearby lamp that had been knocked over during the struggle. There were no signs of forced entry, no visible theft, no struggle that stretched through the house like most domestic scenes, and almost immediately the officers knew they were looking at something different, something deliberate, because whoever had done this had taken their time, had left everything else untouched, had walked out the front door without panic, without urgency, without even bothering to cover their tracks, and the boys, Javian and Kale, were nowhere in sight. They were gone. As crime scene techs began to document the house, a female officer picked up Serena's purse from the floor and heard something faint, something mechanical still humming, and when they unzipped the lining, they found a small hidden recording device, still powered on, still running, its red light blinking steadily like a heartbeat that refused to quit even after everything else had stopped. It took less than an hour for forensic techs to pull the file, to hear the muffled sounds of the confrontation, the shuffling, the heavy breathing, and then the voices, clearer than anyone could have hoped for, Javian's voice sharp and certain, captured. This wasn't a case of self-defense or an accident or a misunderstanding. It was premeditated, planned, executed by hands that should have never been raised against her. The investigation moved quickly after that. Detectives obtained subpoenas to pull digital records, starting with the Instagram handle at Mr. Blazetrue, and it didn't take long for cyber units to trace the IP address used to create the account back to Serena's own Wi-Fi, logged in multiple times from devices registered under her son's names, and the discovery didn't just confirm suspicion, it blew the case wide open. There was no Blaze. There never had been. It was Javian and Kale all along. By Sunday morning, surveillance footage from a gas station 2 blocks away from the Airbnb showed both boys on camera at 9:13 p.m., Javian wearing the same hoodie he had on in the Airbnb footage, Kale holding Serena's phone in his hand, both of them calm, buying a single bottle of water before disappearing into the night. No panic, no signs of remorse, just 2 boys walking into the darkness like nothing had happened. With evidence stacking higher by the hour, arrest warrants were issued by Monday afternoon, full charges filed under their legal names, and for the first time since that cold January night, the pieces of what had happened to Serena Williams were beginning to make a horrifying kind of sense. But for the officers assigned to bring them in, and for the family members waiting for answers they never wanted to hear, the hardest part wasn't the how, it was the why. And that answer, the real full truth, was still waiting to be uncovered. March 2024 arrived heavy and gray, the city still carrying the chill of winter in its early mornings, and when Javian and Kale were escorted into the courtroom for the first time, wearing ill-fitting suits and chains at their wrists. There was a silence so sharp inside the gallery that even the sound of the judge flipping through papers seemed too loud, because it wasn't just a trial people had come to witness. It was the dismantling of an illusion, the final, brutal unraveling of a story that had begun with so much love and ended with so much devastation. Both boys were charged as adults, first-degree murder, identity theft, financial fraud, and though their public defenders tried to argue that they had acted under mental instability, that they had suffered emotional neglect, that growing up with a mother who worked long hours and pushed for success had somehow left them broken, it was clear from the beginning that the courtroom was not buying it, because the evidence didn't speak of impulsive rage or misunderstood cries for help. It spoke of planning, of cold decisions, of months spent weaving a lie so cruel it couldn't be excused by loneliness or teenage confusion. When the prosecution took the floor, they didn't just tell the jury what happened. They showed it, piece by piece, layer by layer, pulling up the bank records that tracked Serena's savings draining one payment at a time, displaying the direct messages where Javian and Kale had crafted the fake Blaze persona, sending voice notes stolen from online strangers to keep up the illusion, reading aloud the captions from the hidden Instagram accounts that mocked her behind her back, and finally, playing the audio from the recorder found in Serena's purse, the cold, undeniable voices of her son spelling out the last moments of her life, their words so casual, so empty of remorse, that more than one juror had to wipe tears from their eyes. The school counselor, Ms. Latrice Bell, took the stand too, her voice shaking only once as she described the warnings she had given, the signs she had seen, the conversations she had tried to start before it was too late, and as the evidence built, as the story of Serena's final months became clearer and heavier, there was no one left in that courtroom who could pretend that this was about a mother who hadn't cared enough. This was about two boys who had wanted more, who had been taught how to reach, but had never been taught how to lose, and when they realized the life they felt entitled to was slipping away, they didn't ask for help, they didn't find another way, they destroyed the one person who had built it for them from nothing. It took the jury less than 3 hours to deliberate, 3 hours to sift through months of lies, a mother's entire life story, and the hollow defense that love should have been enough to excuse betrayal. When they returned, the courtroom fell into that same terrible silence as the clerk read the verdict, guilty on all counts. Javian and Kyle were each sentenced to 45 years to life in prison, with no chance of parole for the first 25 years, and as the judge read the sentence aloud, neither boy looked at each other, neither boy cried, neither boy apologized. They stood there like statues, locked in the final chapter of a story. They had written themselves with hands that once held their mother's, and now carried the weight of her absence forever. And when they were led away, the sound of their chains scraping against the polished courthouse floor was the only sound left behind, a sharp, metallic reminder that some things, once broken, cannot be undone. What would make two teenage boys scam the woman who gave them life? The woman who carried them through sleepless nights, who worked through double shifts and canceled dreams just to keep food on the table, who wore the same pair of black shoes for 3 years, so they could have the newest Jordans, who missed birthdays and anniversaries and quiet mornings, just to make sure they never knew what it felt like to go without. And how do we protect families when the danger doesn't come from outside, when it doesn't wear a stranger's face, when it doesn't break down the door in the middle of the night, but instead sleeps under the same roof, eats at the same table, calls you mom with the same mouth that's planning your downfall behind closed doors? We are taught to watch for monsters in the streets, to be cautious with strangers, to lock our doors at night. But what happens when the danger is born in the same house where you taught someone to walk, to talk, to dream? What happens when love is not enough to save you? Story 4. July 18th, 2015. Sayreville, New Jersey. The lights from the carnival could be seen for miles, bright against the dark sky, flickering in rhythm with the laughter of children and the music of a summer night. Families lined up for rides, parents holding on to sticky fingers, the smell of popcorn and cotton candy thick in the air. It was supposed to be a memory, a night to remember, the kind you tell stories about years later. But by the end of that night, no one would be talking about the rides or the prizes or the joy. They would only remember what went missing. Somewhere between the carousel and the Ferris wheel, a little girl simply vanished. No scream, no struggle. One moment she was there, the next, nothing. This isn't just a story about a missing child. It's a story about what hides behind the people we trust. About how far someone will go to leave their past behind. Michelle Brown had always known how to wear a smile. The kind that didn't ask for attention, but never let anyone look too closely. At 34, she was a familiar face at New Haven Baptist Church, where she worked as the secretary. She handled the bulletins, kept the books in order, and greeted everyone with a quiet nod that seemed humble, almost shy. People trusted Michelle. They said she was devoted, respectful, a woman who understood her place and lived it well. If something troubled her, no one saw it. Or maybe they just didn't want to. Her life from the outside looked steady. She was married to Tobias Brown, a man most folks respected. Tobias, at 38, carried himself with discipline, the kind you don't learn unless you've been through something. A former Marine, he ran a small construction company in town, Brown & Sons, even though he had no sons of his own. Just a dream he held on to. Tobias was the kind of man who believed in hard work, in family, and in God. The kind of man who didn't just say his vows, but meant every word. They'd known each other since high school. Tobias was the one who sat behind Michelle in 10th grade math, always trying to make her laugh. Back then, she liked how sure he was, how safe he made her feel. Their friends used to say they were meant to be, that they'd grow old together. And for a while it seemed like they might. They married young, bought a small house on the east side of town. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. Church on Sundays, barbecues in the summer, holidays with family. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And when Nia was born, everything seemed to fall into place. Nia was their joy. From the moment she could walk, she followed Tobias everywhere. She'd sit on his lap while he read the paper, begged to ride with him when he went to the hardware store, always asking questions, always looking up to him like he could do anything. To Tobias, she could do no wrong. He called her sunshine, said she made even the hardest days easier. But Michelle felt different. She loved her daughter, or at least she told herself she did. But sometimes, when the house was quiet and Tobias wasn't around, she'd watch Nia and feel something she couldn't explain. Resentment, maybe even regret. Michelle had dreams once. She wanted more than this small town, more than a house filled with routine. She wanted to feel alive, to be seen, not just as someone's wife, someone's mother, but as someone who mattered on her own. And slowly, that desire started to show. The marriage began to crack in places no one else could see. Michelle became distant. The conversations they used to have over dinner faded into silence. Tobias thought maybe she was tired, that raising a child and keeping a home was wearing her down. He tried to help more, tried to ask, but Michelle just shook her head and smiled like everything was fine. But it wasn't. There was someone else. Adams Hill had been part of Tobias's life since they were kids. They played football together, went to the same schools, stood next to each other at each other's weddings. Adams wasn't just a friend. He was family. A youth pastor at their church, known for his charm, his way with people. He could make anyone feel special, important. And somewhere along the way, he made Michelle feel that too. It started small. A conversation after service. A hand that lingered a little too long. Words that felt like more than just comfort. Michelle didn't plan for it to happen, or maybe she did. But it did. Tobias never saw it coming. That night in January 2015, he wasn't supposed to come home early. But he did. And what he walked in on shattered everything. His wife, the woman he loved, lying too close to the man he trusted most, on their matrimonial bed. The truth hit him hard. There were no second chances after that. By March, the divorce was final. Tobias didn't want to fight anymore. He just wanted peace. But peace didn't come easy. The court gave Michelle custody of Nia, and that cut deeper than anything. He tried to hold on to his daughter, tried to keep his place in her life, but it wasn't the same. Michelle had what she wanted. But Nia reminded her of the life she wanted to leave behind. Every time she looked into those eyes, so full of love, so full of questions, she felt trapped. To the world, Michelle was a mother doing her best after a painful divorce. But behind closed doors, Nia wasn't her comfort. She was her burden. And Michelle was already thinking about a way to be free. After the divorce, Michelle moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much. Plain walls, creaking floors, and windows that barely let the light in, but it gave her space. Space from Tobias. Space from the life she no longer wanted. She told friends she needed time to heal, that stepping away from the church for a while would help her clear her mind. People nodded, offered prayers, and gave her the distance she asked for. But healing was never her goal. She didn't stop seeing Adams. Their meetings were quiet now, behind closed doors, away from the church and the eyes that might judge them. He would visit late at night, careful not to stay too long, careful not to be seen. To Michelle, those moments with Adams felt like freedom, at least for a while. But there was still Nia. Every morning, Michelle would wake up to her daughter's voice, full of energy, full of questions about her daddy. Nia missed him. She talked about him constantly, about the pancakes he made on Saturdays, about the songs he sang when he tucked her in. And every word felt like a blade. Michelle couldn't stand it. Visitation became a battle. Tobias wanted more time. Michelle wanted him to take less. Their arguments, once behind closed doors, now spilled into phone calls, text messages, court orders. Michelle felt trapped, pulled between the man she was trying to hold on to and the daughter she no longer wanted to care for. Nia didn't understand. She just wanted her family back. Adams, always knowing the right thing to say, began to press harder. He told Michelle they could have a new life together. One without judgment. One without the past hanging over them. But he said it plain, Nia couldn't be part of that life. She's the only thing tying you to him, Adams said one night, his voice low, steady. You'll never be free as long as she's around. Michelle didn't answer right away, but the words stuck. April 2015. Michelle sat alone at her kitchen table, the clock ticking louder than it should have, Nia asleep in the next room. She opened her one she hadn't touched in months and wrote a single line. I can't do this anymore. Every time I look at her, I see him. I see failure. The pen shook in her hand, but she didn't stop. She wrote about the nights she lay awake, thinking about a different life. About how tired she was of being a mother. Of pretending. About how Adams made her feel alive again. Made her feel wanted. And then for the first time, she wrote something she never thought she'd put into words. What if she was gone? Would that be enough to let me breathe? She closed the book, her heart racing. And that's when the plan was born. A plan to erase the past. Completely. August 18th, 2015. The Sayreville Carnival was the highlight of the summer, the kind of event that pulled everyone in. Bright lights, the hum of rides spinning, the sound of children laughing as music filled the air. For most it was a night of fun, of memories made under the open sky. But for Michelle Brown, this night had a different meaning. She dressed Nia carefully that evening. A yellow dress, the one with little white flowers freshly ironed. Her hair was done in 2 neat braids, tied with matching yellow ribbons, and slung over her shoulder was her pink backpack, small, worn, but loved. Inside, she had packed her favorite toy, a little notebook, and a juice box. Michelle knelt down before they left the apartment, straightened Nia's collar, and smiled. Tonight's all about you, she said softly. Nia beamed, excited for the rides, for the games, for time with her mother. They arrived just before sunset, the carnival already alive with movement. Michelle bought tickets, let Nia pick out cotton candy, and even played a few games with her. They laughed as Nia tried to win a stuffed bear, missing every shot but never losing her joy. Michelle held her hand tightly, watching her, studying her. To anyone else, it looked like a perfect night between mother and daughter. But Michelle wasn't there for fun. As the sky darkened, the lights of the Ferris wheel lit up, spinning slowly in the distance. Nia tugged at her mother's hand, pointing, her eyes wide. Can I go on that one? She asked. Michelle nodded. They made their way through the crowd, the noise of the carnival pressing in from every side. Michelle led Nia to the line, bent down, and brushed a stray hair from her daughter's face. Wait here, baby. Mommy's gonna get a soda. I'll be right back. Nia nodded, holding onto her backpack straps, watching her mother walk away. She didn't know it, but this was the moment everything changed. Michelle didn't look back. Adams Hill was already there, standing just beyond the ticket booth, blending in with the other parents, watching. He waited until Michelle was gone, then stepped closer. Nia, he said, his voice low, friendly the way she knew it. Your mommy asked me to take you home. She's not feeling well. Nia looked up, confused. But she said she was getting a soda. Adams crouched down, smiled. She wanted me to come get you. Come on. I'll take you to her. Nia hesitated. She looked back at the line, at the Ferris wheel turning slowly above her, then back at Adams. She trusted him. He had always been around. Mommy's friend. Daddy's friend. She reached out her hand. And that was the last time anyone saw Nia alive. As the carnival lights continued to spin, as laughter echoed through the night, one child disappeared. Quietly, without a sound, and no one noticed. Not yet. 9:42 p.m. The call came in. Michelle's voice was frantic, nearly breathless. My daughter's gone. I can't find her. Please. Someone took her. Dispatch didn't waste time. Within minutes, the Sayreville Police Department arrived at the fairgrounds. Officers quickly locked down the area. The carnival was shut down mid-ride. Music stopped. Games halted. Bright lights that moments ago brought excitement now cast long shadows on confused faces. Firefighters arrived with thermal imaging gear. 9 units were deployed. Volunteers and off-duty officers spread out, scanning every corner of the grounds. Searchlights lit up the fields and parking lots nearby. Helicopters hovered low overhead. Announcements were made over the loudspeakers. But there was no sign of Nia. She hadn't wandered off. She wasn't hiding behind a booth or sitting on a bench. There was nothing. No scream. No dropped shoe. No torn strap from her backpack. It was as if she had vanished from the earth. Michelle, now seated on a bench, rocked back and forth, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. An officer crouched beside her, asking questions, trying to piece together a timeline. Her answers were shaky. "I just turned around," she said. "I told her to wait in line. I went to get a soda." That was the first version. 20 minutes later, another officer pressed her for details. Michelle paused. Her eyes darted. "I think I saw someone watching us earlier," she said. "Near the corn dog stand. A man. I didn't think anything of it at the time." The officer noted the shift. Michelle couldn't describe the man. She couldn't remember what shirt he was wearing. She wasn't sure if he had facial hair. Back at the command center, officers combed through security camera footage from vendor booths and traffic cams nearby. Nothing showed a man approaching Nia. Nothing showed Nia leaving. And then Tobias arrived. He was out of breath, his shirt half-buttoned, dust on his boots like he'd driven straight from a job site. The moment he saw the flashing lights, the officers with clipboards, the crowd gathered in confusion. He knew something was wrong. When he reached Michelle, her face said it all. He asked where Nia was. She didn't answer right away, just stared past him. The officer beside them explained the situation. Tobias' hands curled into fists. "She wouldn't just run off," he said. "She's not like that. If she didn't see her mom, she would have stayed put. She knows better." Michelle looked up at him then. "I swear, Tobias. I only turned around for a second." But something in his gut told him this wasn't right. No forced entry. No ransom note. No signs of a struggle. Just a child who was there. And then wasn't. In the days following Nia's disappearance, the community expected to see a mother unravel. Cameras pointed at Michelle during vigils, interviews, and press updates, but what they saw was different. She spoke in short sentences, rarely cried, and often seemed detached, as if reading from a script. While others clutched photos of Nia and wept during church services, Michelle sat still. Her face unreadable. Her voice flat. At first, people chalked it up to shock. Grief shows itself in different ways. But as time passed, the sympathy started to fade. Her silence felt heavy, not hollow. Her lack of emotion began to look like something else entirely. Michelle stopped answering Tobias' calls. He wanted updates, to help with the search, to stay involved. But she kept her distance. Told him to speak through lawyers. Claimed she needed space to process. Then, slowly, Adams Hill started appearing again. First, it was late-night visits. Then he began showing up at Michelle's apartment during the day. Eventually, he was seen coming and going more frequently, carrying groceries, walking her trash to the curb, even picking up her mail. People noticed. And they talked. Whispers spread. How could a mother who just lost her child move on this quickly? Why would she reconnect with the same man whose involvement ended her marriage so soon after her daughter vanished? The questions reached the police. Both Michelle and Adams were brought in separately for questioning. Detectives hoped the pressure would shake something loose. But both of them stuck to the same lines. Michelle insisting she'd simply turned around and lost sight of Nia. Adams claiming he had nothing to do with it. No one cracked. There was no surveillance showing Adams at the carnival. No fingerprints. No eyewitnesses. And without a body, there was no proof that a crime had even occurred. By October 2015, the case stalled. Evidence ran dry. Leads led nowhere. Media attention faded. The investigation was officially marked as inactive. But Tobias wasn't done. While the department packed up files and moved to other cases, Tobias launched his own search. He dipped into his savings, cashed out a portion of his business, and hired 2 private investigators. Former law enforcement. Men who knew how to work outside of the spotlight. They interviewed vendors, traced phone records, checked vehicle GPS data, and followed Adams' movements in the days before and after the carnival. But still nothing solid. Meanwhile, Michelle started over. She changed her number. Disconnected from mutual friends. removed herself from every online post or group that still talked about Nia. She stopped attending church altogether. By early 2016, Adams had moved into her apartment. No wedding, no announcement, just a quiet transition like nothing had ever happened. Neighbors saw them laughing on the porch, grocery shopping, driving out of town for weekends. Michelle was no longer the grieving mother. She was someone else entirely. Tobias, on the other hand, never stopped. And he never believed the lies. He knew his daughter. He knew her habits. He knew she wouldn't run. And he knew the woman he once loved was hiding something. Something he was determined to uncover, no matter how long it took. May 14th, 2021. A morning that should have been like any other. A construction crew was working deep in the marshlands on the edge of Edison, New Jersey. The air was thick, the ground heavy from days of rain. Bulldozers and excavators cut through the soaked land, pushing aside broken tree limbs and years of forgotten debris. It was supposed to be routine work, clearing ground to lay foundations for a new business park. Nothing unusual, nothing worth remembering, until the machine hit something it shouldn't have. The foreman ordered everything to stop. One of the workers jumped down to take a closer look. There, tangled in the roots of a fallen tree, coated in layers of mud and time, was a small pink backpack, torn at the edges, faded in color. It didn't look like much at first, just another piece of trash buried by time. But when the worker reached down and picked it up, the weight of it told him it was something else. Something important. Something that didn't belong there. Inside the backpack, they found what no one was ready to face. A child's diary, pages glued together with water and dirt, but still readable in places. A small silver locket, rusted but still holding a photo inside. A photo of Tobias Brown smiling, cradling a newborn baby. And at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in what had once been a candy wrapper, a braid of dark hair. Neat. Delicate. Tied with a faded yellow ribbon. The site became a crime scene within hours. Yellow tape wrapped around the marsh as officers combed through the area, inch by inch. Evidence markers dotted the ground like a road map back to a past no one wanted to revisit. The diary was sent to a forensic lab, handled with gloves and patience, as technicians worked carefully to dry the pages without destroying them. Every hour spent waiting felt like years. When investigators finally read the words inside, they realized they weren't just holding evidence. They were holding the last moments of a little girl's trust. Uncle Adam said, "We're going to see Daddy." I don't believe him. I'm scared. Tears welled in the eyes of hardened detectives who had seen more than their share of tragedy. This wasn't just a missing child. This was a betrayal in its purest form. The Sayreville Police Department reopened Nia's case that same day. Search warrants were prepared. Past interviews were rewatched. Old files, dusty and long forgotten, were pulled back into the center of attention. Michelle Brown, now living quietly with Adams Hill in a townhouse on the far side of town, was asked to come in for questioning. Her lawyer answered instead. Michelle declined to cooperate. She said she had no comment. She said she had no idea why Nia's backpack would be buried out in the marshlands. But Adams was another story. Detectives brought him in quietly. No media. No fanfare. Just a plain room, 2 chairs, and a table. At first, Adams sat calmly, his arms crossed, his jaw tight, his answers clipped. Careful. He said he knew nothing. Said he hadn't seen anything that night. But the diary changed everything. When detectives placed it on the table, still dirty, still damp around the edges, something inside Adams shifted. He stared at it too long. His hands trembled. His voice caught when he tried to speak. They didn't push. They let the silence do the work. By the 3rd hour, Adams cracked. He leaned forward, placed his hands flat on the table, and spoke so quietly, the detectives had to lean in to hear him. He admitted to being at the carnival that night. He admitted Michelle told him where to find Nia. Told him exactly what to say. Told him what time to approach. He admitted he took Nia by the hand, led her away. Told her they were going to meet her father. He described how she hesitated. How she looked back toward the crowd. How for a moment he thought she might run. But she didn't. She trusted him. He described driving her to the edge of the marshlands, a place they had scouted weeks earlier. He said he told her everything would be fine. Told her she'd see her daddy soon. Then he stopped talking. What he did next, he said. He didn't want to remember. But investigators needed no more words. They had enough. In searching Michelle's belongings, they found more damning evidence. Letters tucked into a storage box, written in her careful, neat handwriting. Some dated months before the carnival. Some written just days before. One stood out. After this, it's just us. No past. No mistakes. No more chains to him. It wasn't a single act. It was a plan. A plan nurtured over time. Built on anger. On resentment. On a need to erase everything Michelle saw as her failure. The air outside the Middlesex County Courthouse was sharp with winter cold. But inside the courtroom, the tension was heavier than any storm. People packed into the wooden benches. Coats still clutched around them. As they waited for the everyone had been talking about for months to begin, Michelle Brown entered first, escorted by deputies. She wore a dark gray suit, plain and unadorned. Her face, pale and unreadable, stayed fixed forward. She barely glanced at the rows of faces turned toward her. There were no tears, no trembling, only a cold stillness that made even seasoned reporters shift uncomfortably in their seats. Next came Adams Hill. He shuffled forward in an orange prison jumpsuit, his hands cuffed in front of him. His once proud stance had crumbled. His shoulders sagged under the weight of the moment. The charges were read aloud. First-degree murder, conspiracy, child abuse. Each word echoed in the silent room, cutting through whatever hope might have been left. The prosecution wasted no time laying out their case. They painted the picture of a mother who saw her child not as a blessing, but as an anchor tying her to a past she desperately wanted to escape. They showed how Michelle and Adams had conspired together, using trust as a weapon against the very person who loved them most. They brought out the diary, the last written words of a little girl who had felt fear, but had no one left to protect her. They displayed the letters Michelle had written to Adams, each one a step closer to betrayal. They showed the phone records that placed Adams near the carnival grounds on the night Nia disappeared. Witness after witness took the stand. Law enforcement officers detailed the long investigation. Forensic experts explained how the backpack survived in the marsh for 6 years. Family friends talked about Nia's relationship with her parents, the deep bond she had with her father, and how even at 5 years old she knew when something felt wrong. Through it all, Michelle sat motionless, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes flat. When it was Adams's turn to testify, the room seemed to hold its breath. He stepped slowly to the stand. His voice was low, hoarse from days of silence, but he spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. "She made me do it," he said, his hands clenching the sides of the witness box. "She wanted Nia gone. She said every time she looked at her, she saw the life she hated, the life she wanted to forget." He described how Michelle planned the night, how she directed every move, how she convinced herself that Nia's absence would mean freedom, a clean slate. He didn't excuse what he had done. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the truth bare, piece by painful piece. The defense tried to discredit him. They painted him as a coward, a liar looking for a lighter sentence, but the evidence spoke louder than any accusation. When the final letter was read aloud, "After this, it's just us." No past, no mistakes, no more chains to him. Several jurors looked away, unable to meet the reality staring back at them from the paper. The closing arguments were brief. The prosecution asked for justice, not just for a life lost, but for a trust that had been broken in the cruelest way possible. The defense offered little beyond blame, shifting and hollow explanations. The jury deliberated for just under 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom grew so quiet that every shuffle, every breath seemed too loud. The foreman stood, hands steady, voice sure, guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, guilty of child abuse resulting in death. The verdict for Adams Hill followed swiftly, guilty on all counts, life without the possibility of parole. Michelle showed no reaction as the words were spoken, no tears, no pleas, just the same blank stare she had worn from the moment she stepped into the room. Barely 2 months after the verdict, news broke that shook the town once again. Adams Hill, convicted murderer and once respected youth pastor, was found dead inside his prison cell at Southwood State Prison, stabbed multiple times during the early hours of the morning. Prison officials released a brief statement calling it an inmate altercation. No names were given, no details released to the public, but inside the prison, the story moved faster than guards could contain it. Some said it was random, wrong place, wrong time. Others believed something else. Rumors spread quietly at first. Maybe Tobias, broken by grief, had found a way to reach beyond the courtroom. Maybe justice hadn't ended at sentencing, that someone somewhere had made sure Adams Hill paid a heavier price. Of course, nothing was ever proven. Tobias Brown never responded directly to the whispers. When reporters asked, he only said, "I put it in God's hands." And if there was more behind those words, If there was a story that would never be told, he kept it buried with the same quiet strength that had carried him through every awful step of losing his daughter. Meanwhile, Michelle Brown sat alone in a windowless cell, confined to solitary for her protection. 23 hours a day inside 4 cold walls, the last hour under armed escort to an empty yard. No visitors, no family, no voice but her own. Even now, she insisted she was innocent. She claimed the letters were misunderstood, claimed Adams had twisted her words, claimed she had been trapped by circumstances beyond her control. But nobody was listening anymore. How far would someone go to escape their past? For Michelle Brown, it was far enough to lose everything she once claimed to love. Far enough to betray the one person who looked up to her without question. Far enough to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. When people speak of betrayal, they often picture quiet moments, silent decisions made behind closed doors. But betrayal doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it screams. Sometimes it walks hand in hand with innocence. Sometimes it leaves behind a small pink backpack buried deep in the mud, soaked by years of rain, carrying the final pieces of a truth too heavy for words. Nia Brown didn't just vanish that night. She was led away by people she trusted. And in her final moments, she must have wondered why the ones who promised to protect her were the ones who failed her most. That trust, once broken, echoes longer than any courtroom sentence. It lingers in every unanswered question, every sleepless night, every parent's silent prayer for their child's safety. Michelle sits in a prison cell now, her world reduced to concrete walls and memories she cannot erase. Adams is gone, buried under the same system that once tried to rehabilitate him. And Tobias Brown walks forward carrying a weight no father should ever bear. The knowledge that love alone wasn't enough to save his daughter from the people she trusted most. Communities heal. Time softens edges. But some losses stay sharp, no matter how many years pass. Story 5. February 20th, 2019. The night Oprah Daniels was murdered, everything seemed normal on the surface. Derek Cole and his daughter Ayanna appeared to be just like any other family. Grief-stricken, shocked, trying to cope with the tragedy that had struck their lives. They embraced, they cried, they prayed for strength. They played the part of the devastated husband and daughter, clinging to each other for comfort, surrounded by family and friends who had no idea that the very people who were mourning their loss were the ones responsible for it. But behind the tears and the carefully rehearsed grief, something was terribly wrong, and the truth. It was hidden beneath the surface in the cold, calculated actions of a father and daughter who had just destroyed the very person who had given them everything. What happened that night? How could two people who were supposed to love her betray her in such a brutal way? The answers would come, but not easily. Oprah Daniels was born into a world of hardship. Raised in a small, economically struggling town in Florida, her early years were shaped by instability. Her father was largely absent, drifting in and out of her life, while her mother, though physically present, was emotionally distant, overwhelmed by her own struggles with mental health and substance abuse. Oprah quickly learned that love was not a given, and that survival often meant standing alone. As a young child, she found herself taking care of her younger siblings, shouldering responsibilities far beyond her years. The emotional neglect left its mark, making Oprah feel isolated, but also instilling a deep resilience within her. In the absence of love, she learned to protect herself and push forward, determined not to let her circumstances define her. Despite the emotional toll of her upbringing, Oprah was determined to create a different life for herself. Education became her escape. She threw herself into school, using books as her refuge from the chaos at home. By the time she graduated high school, Oprah was already planning her future, knowing that her best chance at a better life lay in her own hands. She dreamed of making a difference, of helping others who were as lost as she had once felt. That dream led her to a career in law enforcement. Oprah joined the police academy at 23, driven by a desire to help others and to prove that she could rise above the pain of her past. She started at the bottom, working her way up with sheer determination and a deep compassion for those in need. She became known for her ability to handle even the most challenging situations with grace, her calm presence bringing comfort to people in crisis. As Oprah rose through the ranks to become a deputy sheriff, her career became her pride, a symbol of her strength and resilience. It was the one place in her life where she had complete control, where she could make a difference and find purpose. For Oprah, her work wasn't just a job, It was a testament to her ability to rebuild, to heal, and to prove that she could rise above the past that had tried to hold her down. After her first marriage ended in divorce, Oprah embraced her independence and focused on her career. The divorce, though painful, became a turning point. Oprah had married young, hoping to find the love and stability that had always eluded her, but she soon discovered that her first husband's infidelity and emotional abuse could not be fixed by love alone. She left the marriage with a sense of emptiness, but also a renewed sense of determination. She knew that she deserved more than what she had been given, and she wasn't willing to settle for anything less. Oprah threw herself into her work, finding solace and strength in her career. The scars of her first marriage remained, but they no longer defined her. Oprah had long dreamed of a second chance at love, and in 2016, she believed she had found it in Derek Cole. Derek, 32, was 12 years younger than Oprah and came with a troubled past, a former felon with no job and no formal education. Derek Cole was a man of contrasts. At 32 years old, he had lived a life that was far from easy. Raised in a broken family, Derek knew what it was like to feel abandoned, to be left behind by those who should have cared for him the most. His childhood was marked by neglect and hardship, and as a young man, he made choices that would shape the rest of his life. From petty theft to a felony conviction, Derek's criminal record was long and filled with mistakes. He never had the luxury of stability or support. Instead, he was forced to learn how to survive on his own. But Derek wasn't without charm. He knew how to talk his way into almost anything, whether it was getting out of trouble or into someone's life. He could be captivating, disarming, and convincing when he wanted to be, and that's exactly what he did with Oprah. She saw a man who, despite his troubled past, had potential. She saw someone who could turn his life around, someone who could thrive if given the right opportunity. Derek, aware of Oprah's compassion and her belief in second chances, used that to his advantage. He fed her the right words, told her what she needed to hear. In return, Oprah opened her heart and her life to him. The cracks in Derek's character, however, were never too far beneath the surface. His troubled past never truly left him, no matter how hard he tried to hide it. He struggled with his own demons, feelings of inadequacy and resentment that he couldn't shake. He was uneducated, jobless, and increasingly bitter toward Oprah's success. He didn't want to live in the shadow of her accomplishments. He wanted to tear her down so that he could stand on equal ground. Derek's feelings of inadequacy became anger, and that anger would eventually lead him down a dark path. Derek wasn't a man who dealt well with frustration. He wanted to be the one in control, to be the one who made the decisions. As Oprah's career continued to flourish, Derek's resentment festered. The love that once seemed genuine began to feel like a burden to him. What started as a relationship built on hope and second chances slowly devolved into a toxic mix of manipulation and emotional abuse. Derek felt trapped, suffocated by Oprah's success and the life she had built without him. Ayanna Cole, Derek's 17-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, was a girl caught between two worlds. Raised by a mother who struggled with addiction and a father who was emotionally absent, Ayanna had known more than her fair share of hardship. By the time Oprah entered her life, Ayanna had already seen enough pain to last a lifetime. She had been neglected, ignored, and abandoned by her parents in different ways. Oprah was a beacon of light in a life that had been filled with darkness. Oprah took Ayanna in without hesitation, offering her a safe home, a steady environment, and the love that Ayanna had never experienced. Oprah was kind, nurturing, and patient, offering Ayanna a second chance at a stable life. She provided for Ayanna, gave her an education, and treated her like her own child. For a while, Ayanna embraced this new life, grateful for the opportunity to have a mother who truly cared for her. Oprah's love seemed to fill the void Ayanna had carried for so long. But Ayanna's gratitude began to fade as the tension between Derek and Oprah grew. Derek's manipulations became more apparent, and Ayanna, like her father, began to resent Oprah's authority in the home. She felt torn between her loyalty to her father, who had given her so little, and the woman who had given her everything. She began to see Oprah not as a mother, but as an obstacle to the life Derek wanted, and one that Ayanna could no longer ignore. The emotional strain of living in a home filled with conflict began to take its toll on Ayanna. She too began to harbor resentment toward Oprah for the control she had over their lives. Ayanna, like Derek, felt trapped. The man she had once idolized, her father, was now a source of tension, and Oprah, who had given her so much, was slowly becoming a threat to her sense of loyalty. The The loyalty Ayanna once felt toward Oprah began to shift as she found herself aligned with her father's anger. Despite these red flags, Oprah saw potential in him. She believed in second chances, both in love and life. She thought that just like her, Derek could overcome his past and build a better future. Derek had a charm that could disarm anyone, and he quickly convinced Oprah that he was the man she had been waiting for. He promised her that he had changed, that his past was behind him. Oprah, ever the optimist, believed him. As time passed, cracks began to show in Derek's character. His past wasn't easily shaken. His resentment toward Oprah's success and the life she had built without him started to eat away at him. Derek felt inferior, threatened by Oprah's career and independence. The love that Oprah had once believed in began to turn into frustration and anger. He felt small under her shadow, and instead of growing alongside her, he began to pull away, increasingly resentful of the life Oprah had created for herself. His emotional manipulation grew, and Oprah found herself trapped in a relationship where her efforts to help Derek only seemed to make him angrier. When she discovered one of his affairs involved a girl 3 years older than Ayanna, the reality of his betrayal became too much to bear. Oprah filed for divorce, determined to start over, and finally rid herself of the toxic relationship that had once seemed so full of potential. She began removing Derek's name from their joint accounts and made plans to sell the house. She was ready to move on, to reclaim her life and her peace. But Derek, feeling emasculated and betrayed, had other plans. Derek couldn't bear the thought of losing everything. The resentment that had built up over the years turned into rage, and in his mind, Oprah had to be eliminated. He couldn't allow her to expose him, to take away the life he had grown so comfortable in. Derek made a decision that would change everything, a decision that would ultimately cost Oprah her life. The night of February 20th, 2019 was a tragic turn of events, one that would unravel the lives of those involved in ways no one could have foreseen. Derek Cole, in interviews with the police, painted a heart-wrenching picture of what happened that evening. He described a serene night, just a simple outing with his wife, Oprah, and his daughter, Ayanna. According to Derek, they had been driving home from a small sit, out when they came across a group of beggars standing by the side of the road. Oprah, true to her compassionate nature, insisted they stop so she could offer them some money. It was a gesture that seemed in line with her kind-hearted character, something she would do without hesitation. But Derek's account quickly shifted into something more disturbing. He claimed that as Oprah stepped out of the car to give money to the beggars, 2 men appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, they attacked Oprah with knives, stabbing her repeatedly. Derek, in his account, painted himself as the helpless bystander, struggling to protect Oprah, while Ayanna, too, tried to intervene. The whole ordeal, he claimed, happened so fast, leaving no time to act. The grief Derek expressed in his recounting seemed sincere. His voice cracked, and tears streamed down his face as he painted the scene of his wife's brutal murder. Ayanna, too, was described as a distraught daughter, crying uncontrollably in the background. The story was tragic, and the emotions appeared genuine. However, as the investigation began, the police started to notice inconsistencies. There was something unsettling about Derek's version of events. For one, there were no signs of forced entry into the car. No weapon was found at the scene, and most notably, there was no evidence of a robbery. Oprah's phone was charging at home, her purse was still in the house, and her personal items, including her credit cards, jewelry, and car keys, remained untouched. These were all things you would expect to be taken if the attack had truly been a robbery gone wrong. Suspicion deepened as further investigation revealed more red flags in Derek's story. Surveillance footage from nearby cameras showed no sign of beggars or any attackers on the road where Derek said the incident had taken place. Not only that, but the footage also revealed something more damning. Derek and Ayanna were never even near the location Derek had described. The supposed site of the attack was nowhere in sight. What was even more concerning was the lack of any physical evidence on Derek or Ayanna. Neither of them had any injuries, no cuts, bruises, or signs of struggle despite Derek's claim that they had tried to fight off the attackers. The more the investigators looked into it, the more Derek's story seemed to crumble. As the investigation deepened, Derek's emotional breakdown seemed less convincing. His tears, once so believable, now appeared to be a performance. Why wasn't there any sign of a struggle on either Derek or Ayanna? Why was Ayanna, the one who supposedly had tried to intervene, completely unscathed? The questions kept piling up and Derek's account became harder to accept. How could a brutal attack happen so quickly, yet leave no physical trace on those who were supposedly involved. Then came the first major crack in Derek's alibi. A hidden camera, placed along the route they actually took that night, revealed startling new footage. It showed Oprah stepping out of the car, as Derek had claimed, but then something unexpected happened. Derek followed her out of the car, and minutes later, Ayanna followed suit. The chilling part? Only Derek and Ayanna returned to the car moments later, alone. Oprah, the woman who had stepped out of the car in full view of the camera, was never seen coming back. This new footage sent shockwaves through the investigation. Derek's claims of a robbery gone wrong no longer held weight. The supposed attackers had never been seen, and Oprah had walked away from the car, only to disappear. The more the police looked, the more it seemed that the story Derek had told was nothing but a fabrication, one that was quickly unraveling. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fit together, but they didn't paint the picture Derek had so carefully constructed. Derek's tears, Ayanna's sorrow, it was all beginning to look like an elaborate lie. As the investigation progressed, the cracks in Derek's story widened, leaving a trail of deception that would soon lead to a devastating truth. The first breakthrough came when investigators turned their attention to phone tower data. It was a simple step, but one that would become critical to unraveling the truth. Derek had told police that after the supposed robbery, they had driven straight home, and that the attack had occurred on a road far from their house. However, the phone tower data revealed a glaring inconsistency. Derek's and Ayanna's phones had pinged at a location far from the scene where they claimed the attack had happened. In fact, their phones had been in a nearby alley, an area not even close to the road Derek had described. The phones had gone silent during the critical 37-minute window, the exact time Oprah was murdered, and the time it would have taken Derek and Ayanna to clean up the crime scene. The silence of their phones during this period wasn't just unusual, it was damning. How could their phones have gone silent when they were supposedly making their way home during the exact time of the alleged attack? This was the first real crack in Derek's story. As the investigation pressed on, forensic evidence started to fill in the gaps. The police focused on Derek's car, hoping to find any trace of Oprah's blood or evidence of a struggle. It wasn't long before they found exactly what they were looking for. Oprah's blood was discovered in the back seat of Derek's car, in places that shouldn't have been touched if Derek's story were true. How had Oprah's blood gotten into the car? According to Derek, she had been stabbed at the roadside, but the blood found in the car suggested that Oprah had been inside the vehicle at some point after the attack, possibly while still alive. It was clear now that the scene Derek had described was completely fabricated. Oprah had never been left to die by the roadside. She had been taken somewhere else, possibly even driven around while she was still alive, until the fatal moments when she was ultimately killed. Further analysis of the evidence would lead to even more incriminating details. Investigators found Ayanna's fingerprints on the trash bins outside their home, where the bloody towels and gloves used to clean up the crime had been discarded. The presence of Ayanna's fingerprints on the evidence bins was no mere coincidence. It was clear now that both Derek and Ayanna had been involved in the murder and the subsequent attempt to stage a robbery gone wrong. They had worked together, from the brutal stabbing to the cover-up, and now their actions were beginning to unravel under the scrutiny of the police. With the mounting evidence, the detectives began to confront Derek and Ayanna with the inconsistencies in their statements. Derek's emotional breakdowns, which had once seemed genuine, began to look more like performances. His story was falling apart, piece by piece. The grief he had displayed after Oprah's death was now under suspicion. Was it real, or was it just a well-rehearsed act? Ayanna, too, was forced to account for her behavior. The police had noted her controlled, almost robotic grief. It was as if she had gone through the motions of mourning, but without the raw emotion that should have accompanied such a tragic loss. She had posted on social media, calling Oprah my second mom, all while helping her father clean up the evidence of the murder. How could Ayanna have been so convincing in her grief, when, at the same time, she had been complicit in her mother's death? The more the police pressed them, the more it became evident that they were both hiding something, a truth that they weren't ready to admit. As the investigation deepened, the detectives focused their attention on Derek's motive. It became clear that there was more to this story than a random act of violence. Derek's resentment toward Oprah had been building for months. His frustration with her decision to file for divorce was the key that unlocked the door to his motive. Derek felt emasculated by Oprah's success. She had built a life for herself, one that was independent and secure, and one that Derek could never be a part of. Oprah's decision to divorce him was the final straw. To Derek, it felt like a rejection, not just of their marriage, but of him as a person. His pride had been wounded, and his anger turned to rage. The thought of Oprah exposing him, revealing the truth about his lies and affairs, was more than he could bear. Derek had been living off Oprah's generosity for years. He had relied on her financial support, her career, and her status to maintain the life he had grown accustomed to. But now that Oprah was ready to leave him, ready to expose the lies and the affair he had been hiding, Derek feared that everything he had would be taken away. He couldn't let that happen. His twisted logic led him to believe that the only way to hold on to his free ride, to protect the life he had built on Oprah's success, was to take her life. But the murder wasn't just about a broken marriage or a sense of betrayal. Derek knew that Oprah was an obstacle. She was standing in the way of his comfortable life, and he wasn't willing to let her tear that down. He had been stealing from her for months, siphoning money from their accounts, using her kindness and generosity for his own gain. Oprah had no idea the depths of Derek's deceit, but she was about to find out. As she moved toward filing for divorce and starting fresh, Derek knew his time was running out. His desperation drove him to kill her, and Ayanna, his daughter, the one person he thought he could trust, became his accomplice in this dark plot. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together, the detectives understood just how far Derek and Ayanna had gone to hide the truth. They had created an elaborate lie, a perfect story to explain Oprah's murder as an accident, a random act of violence. But the forensic evidence, phone records, and inconsistencies in their statements told a different story. Derek's motive became clearer with every new revelation. His need for control, his fear of exposure, and his resentment toward Oprah had driven him to murder. And now, with the truth on the brink of being exposed, Derek and Ayanna's carefully constructed facade was starting to crumble, leaving nothing but a trail of lies and bloodshed in its wake. With the new forensic evidence in hand, the detectives began to press Derek and Ayanna. Derek, having been confronted with the undeniable proof, finally cracked during an intense interrogation. His confession, though long awaited, was as chilling as it was revealing. He admitted to the murder, though his words were filled with justification. Derek claimed that Oprah had humiliated him, that her decision to divorce him had stripped him of his dignity. He expressed deep resentment toward Oprah's success and the fact that she was about to expose his lies. "She wanted to throw us out like trash," Derek said in a cold, almost detached voice. "Well, now she's nothing." His confession painted a portrait of a man who was consumed with rage and insecurity. Derek had spent years living off Oprah's success, using her kindness to his advantage. When Oprah decided to stand up for herself, to break free from the toxic relationship, Derek saw it as a personal betrayal. His justification for killing Oprah was rooted in his own sense of entitlement, a belief that he deserved the life she had built for herself, even if it meant destroying the very woman who had given him everything. Derek's words were filled with anger, but beneath that anger was a clear admission of his guilt. He didn't just kill Oprah in a fit of rage, he had planned it. He had made the decision that her life would be taken, and in his mind, he had every right to do so. As the truth about Derek's actions came to light, Ayanna's role in the murder began to surface as well. Initially, Ayanna had been seen as a victim of her father's influence, a young girl manipulated into participating in something she didn't fully understand. But the evidence told a different story. Ayanna was not an innocent bystander. She was complicit in the murder. She had watched her father kill Oprah and then helped him clean up the crime scene. The emotional manipulation Derek had subjected Ayanna to for years had prepared her for this moment. She was drawn into his plan, a plan that had been executed with chilling precision. Ayanna, though only 17 at the time of the murder, was tried as an adult. The legal system, in light of her active involvement in the crime, treated her like any other adult offender. The trial was a painful process for Oprah's family and friends, who had once welcomed Ayanna into their lives. They had seen her as Oprah's daughter, a girl Oprah had lovingly embraced and raised as her own. To learn that Ayanna had played a key role in her death was a betrayal that cut deeply. The emotional fallout from the trial was overwhelming, as friends and family grappled with the fact that Oprah had been murdered by the very people she had given everything to. As the trial unfolded, the true depth of Derek and Ayanna's coldness was laid bare. Derek's manipulation of his daughter, the way he had controlled her emotions and molded her into an accomplice, was revealed in painful detail. Ayanna, too, was shown to have been an active participant, not just a victim of her father's influence. She had been complicit in the lies, the cover-up, and ultimately in the murder of the woman who had shown her nothing but love. The contrast between the public grief they had displayed and the cold, calculated actions they had taken behind closed doors was chilling. Oprah's family and friends struggled to understand how this could happen, how the people Oprah had trusted and loved could betray her in such a brutal, unforgivable way. Derek's and Ayanna's actions were a stark reminder of how manipulation and resentment could destroy everything, even the strongest relationships. The emotional betrayal Oprah had suffered at the hands of those closest to her would resonate with everyone who knew her. The grief that filled her family's hearts was compounded by the shock of the betrayal. Oprah, who had spent her life helping others, had been betrayed by the very people she had tried to help the most. As the investigation and trial reached their conclusion, justice was served, but it came at a terrible price. July 19, 2019 marked the end of a long and painful journey for Oprah Daniels' family and friends. The day had come to a conclusion that many had hoped for, but one that still felt heavy with the weight of the loss. It was the day Derek and Ayanna Cole were sentenced for their roles in the brutal murder of Oprah, a day that would bring justice but also expose the emotional and psychological scars that would remain long after the gavel fell. For Oprah's family, the trial had been a difficult process, full of twists, turns, and moments of disbelief. They had spent months waiting, hoping that the truth would come to light and that Derek and Ayanna would face the consequences of their actions. What they had endured throughout the investigation and trial was nothing short of devastating. Oprah had been their rock, the one who had provided love, stability, and support, only to be taken away by the very people she had trusted the most. But now they were finally going to get the justice Oprah had been denied. As the courtroom filled on that fateful day, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Oprah's family sat in the front row, their faces a mixture of grief, pain, and anger. They had heard the details of the betrayal in court, how Derek had killed Oprah in cold blood, driven by resentment and desperation. They had heard the heartbreaking testimony of Ayanna, the young woman who had once been embraced as family, but who had helped orchestrate the murder of the woman who had loved her as her own daughter. Derek and Ayanna sat side by side in the courtroom, both expressions hardened, though Derek's face was the more emotionally volatile of the two. He shifted in his seat, his eyes glazed over, as if the reality of the day was finally sinking in. Ayanna, by contrast, looked down, her gaze fixed on the table in front of her. The lack of emotion in her eyes seemed cold and distant, as if the weight of her actions hadn't yet fully landed on her. The judge took his seat and called the court to order, signaling that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The district attorney, who had worked tirelessly throughout the trial, stood and presented the final arguments. He outlined the gravity of the crime, painting a clear picture of the betrayal and premeditated murder that had occurred. He spoke of the years of manipulation, the lies, and the horrific aftermath that had been created by Derek and Ayanna's actions. Derek had murdered Oprah not in a fit of rage, but as an act of calculated revenge. Ayanna had stood by and helped him cover up the crime, contributing to the coldest betrayal imaginable. As the sentence was read, there was a collective breath held in the courtroom. Derek was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. His coldness, his complete lack of remorse, had sealed his fate. Ayanna, though young, was sentenced to 25 years to life, with the possibility of parole after 20 years. It was a harsh sentence, but one that reflected her role in the crime, her participation in the murder and the cover-up, her complete disregard for the woman who had raised her with love and care. Oprah's family listened in silence, the impact of the sentence sinking in. For them, there was no true closure. No amount of punishment could bring Oprah back. No sentence would heal the gaping wound in their hearts. They had lost their sister, their mother, their friend, in the most horrific way possible, and while justice had been served, the grief and pain that came with losing Oprah would never go away. In the aftermath of the sentencing, Oprah's family spoke briefly, their words marked by a sorrow that could never truly be understood by anyone who hadn't experienced their pain. They thanked the prosecutor and the investigators for their hard work and dedication, but they also reflected on the heartache of losing Oprah in such a senseless way. They remembered the woman she had been, strong, kind, loving, and dedicated to helping others. They shared stories of the life she had built, the second chances she had given others, and the family she had embraced and loved with all her heart. And then, as they left the courtroom, there was one final, lingering thought. The knowledge that Oprah would never have wanted this. She had spent her life helping others, always believing that love could heal. Yet, the love she had given so freely had been betrayed. Derek and Ayana's actions had stolen her life, and it was a loss that could never truly be replaced. July 19th, 2019, was a day that brought a measure of justice. But for Oprah's family, the journey toward healing had only just begun. As the trial came to an end, as the gavel fell and justice was served, one truth remains undeniably clear. Oprah Daniels' life was stolen from her, not by a stranger or a random act of violence, but by the very people she had loved, trusted, and believed in. Derek and Ayana Cole, the people she took into her home, the people she gave her heart to, repaid her with the most horrific betrayal imaginable. They murdered the woman who had selflessly cared for them, who had believed in them even when the rest of the world had written them off. The complexity of this case lies not just in the brutal nature of the crime, but in the emotional manipulation that led to it. Derek's years of resentment and anger festered until they boiled over into murder, and Ayana, a young girl caught in the emotional crossfire, found herself complicit in the unthinkable. Oprah, who had spent a lifetime showing others the power of second chances, was deceived by those closest to her in the most devastating way. But it raises a critical question. Can we ever truly know the people closest to us? Oprah believed in love and second chances, but could she have known the depths of betrayal Derek and Ayana were capable of? How much can we really trust the ones we let into our lives, the ones we love, the ones we protect? When does loyalty cross the line into something far darker, something unrecognizable, something deadly? These questions linger long after the trial ends, after the final sentence is passed. They challenge us to reflect on our own relationships, to ask ourselves how well we really know the people closest to us. Are we truly seeing them for who they are, or are we seeing only what we want to see? As we close this chapter, the story of Oprah Daniels, her life, her death, and the ultimate betrayal by the people she loved, leaves us with more than just a haunting memory. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of manipulation, the darkness that can lie beneath the surface of those we trust, and the devastating consequences of emotional manipulation. Now, I turn to you, the viewer. What do you think about the nature of betrayal? Have you ever been deceived by someone you trusted? How far do you think loyalty can go before it becomes something far darker? And what does justice truly look like in a case like this, where a woman, a mother, a friend, was taken from the world by the very people she believed in? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Engage with this story. Reflect on the lessons it teaches us about trust, betrayal, and the complexities of human relationships. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.